Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. Topics for tonight are U.S. trap, destroy BRICS, pressures on Trump, stunning predictions, and expectations. Uh, if you'll excuse me for a second, I'm going to check to see if Dee will be joining us or not. Sure, I sent her the links. Let's see. Oh, I neglected to send links to Dee tonight. Uh, so I'm going to send those to her now. I thought I sent them to her. I sent the contact links for the show, but I didn't send the studio link. So doing that right now. So that means that in a minute or two, Dee will be joining us. That's my friend, Dee Pierce, the host of Around the World with Dee and Friends. Uh, so, also, before we go any further, I'm going to share this on Twitter. Sorry, things are a little delayed here tonight. But, yeah, there we go. Oh, there's Dee. I'm going to let her in. Hello.
Hello.
I'm sorry to be late. I thought I had sent you the studio link, but I guess I only sent you the content links for the show.
Yes.
Okay, and not the studio link. So I apologize.
Okay, we got it settled.
Okay, for the oversight. Yes. And Steve Wolfbrand is here. Hello, Steve. Also, Evelina is here from Facebook.
Good evening, everyone. Glad to see everyone's here.
But we will take a moment to share this on Facebook, or I will.
And I will too.
Okay. And then I'm going to take a moment to share this on Twitter as well. Uh, hmm,
Okay, what's going on here?
I don't know. Is something special going on?
Now, I'm wondering why I'm not seeing. Let me just refresh my Facebook. Let me see here.
Okay. Things do seem to be normal.
Yeah, I'm not seeing you right now. I'll just go over to your. I'll go over to Joe Firestone. So I don't see it in my.
Okay, you're not seeing me on Empowering Democracy?
Let me see. So if I go over to you. Okay, if I go over to you, it says you're live. Okay, so I'll just share it from there. Okay. No,
Okay.
sometimes they let you know that what shows are they'll let me know, but for some reason they didn't show me, so I'm just going over to you and I'm sharing it from yours.
Right. Sometimes things don't go exactly as we plan. All
Hmm.
right, what is it? Uh, Next.
Okay.
Okay, so Operation.
Okay.
Okay. So I shared it both on Twitter and on Facebook.
Okay. I'm still sharing on Facebook. I have 2 accounts that I usually share to.
Okay, that's great.
Here we go. Joe Firestone.
Okay, so I think we're done with the preliminaries. We're just about done with the preliminaries. And we can start off. We evidently lost 2 people. Oh, here we go, back on.
Okay.
Okay. So,
Okay. And
I think
sharing this to some groups here.
we're going to start off with a couple of blogs from Larry Johnson tonight, and then we're going to move into our video for the night.
Okay.
And our topics are, U.S. trap. That, of course, refers to the upcoming meeting, in Alaska for Trump and Putin. Uh, uh, Destroy BRICS, question mark. That's also about whether the U.S. is really trying to destroy BRICS. Then our third topic is pressures on Trump. Our fourth topic is a stunning prediction. Okay, this is by Jeffrey Sachs.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, we have the topic of expectations for the meeting on Friday. So all these are very interesting topics. Dee, since we're starting off with the blogs, would you like to start off with the first, or would you rather I start it off?
I could start it off. I'll share when I get, well, yeah, because I'm sharing right now. Why don't we just wait a minute. So I'm just going over to X to share it on X, and
Okay,
then I will start reading.
okay, that's fine. I'll put the article up, and we'll wait for you.
Right, and this way gives people a chance to come in.
Yes.
Okay. Joe Firestone. So how's Bonnie doing?
Hey, Bonnie, how you doing?
I'm doing great.
That's good.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, she is feeling pretty well.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, we still haven't gotten the results of the new X-ray from yesterday. And we wonder what the holdup is on that one.
Right. Everything takes time.
Not always. It's like
That's true.
if I get a CT scan, it seems like the results are there in a few hours. If I get a bone scan, it's also there in a few hours. Okay, but the X-rays take a long time. I don't know why the results on X-rays take a long time. I think it's because they don't pay enough attention to X-rays.
They don't take it as something that has to be right away, I guess.
I guess.
Okay, 1 minute. Let me. Okay. Okay, here I go. Let me enlarge it.
Okay.
Okay, and here we go. Has Putin learned the lessons of the Battle of the Baltsviv and Minsk II?
Yes, the bolt said.
9 August 2025 by Larry C. Johnson.
Okay. Mr. Wonderful has arrived early tonight.
Oh, good.
He is now here. Hello, Mr. Wonderful. Steve, of course, is here. Steve Wolfbrand. Evelina, we've already said hello to them,
Mm-hmm.
of course. Okay, please do go ahead, Dee.
Okay, scroll.
Yes, I will.
Okay. And the picture here, it says Russia-controlled territory before 12 to 17 February 2015, and then Russia-controlled territory on 18 February 2015, and then Russia hybrid forces 12 to 17 February 2015, and Ukraine forces withdraw 18 February 2015. It's in the arrows and all.
Yeah, this is I guess the arrows are indicating the battle. And the battle was at Debaltseve.
Hmm.
Debaltseve.
Yes. I will answer my question right up front. Yes. The reaction of the West, especially that of Donald J. Trump, to Russia's current offensive all along the line of contact, is reminiscent of the panic that seized the West in 2015 following Ukraine's loss in the Battle of Debaltseve. The battle came about in part because of the failure of Minsk I and was the impetus for Minsk II. So, what does this have to do with the current situation in Ukraine? I believe that the primary reason Donald J. Trump dramatically shortened his 50-day deadline for Russia to agree to a ceasefire in 10 days was because of the dire situation Ukraine now faces all along the line of contact. The Debaltseve was just one battle, which Ukraine lost. The current battles underway are far greater and encompass the following agglomerations.
Okay, we should note, I think, while we go through this article, that this was written on August 9th. It's now August 12th, and it's generally agreed that the front is collapsing for the Ukrainians right now. Great advances were made in the Pokrovsk area, and it's beginning to look like a collapse of the Ukrainians. But
Right.
let's go on with this article because this certainly is talking about the beginning of the collapse.
So, what does this have to do with current situation in Ukraine? I believe that the primary reason Donald J. Trump dramatically I read that already.
Yeah.
All right, Turansk, Donetsk Oblast. Intense battles are ongoing near Turansk, including Ukrainian advances with Katarnivka and Shlobovnica.
I love those Russian names.
I know, right?
Yeah.
And Russian advances in nearby areas such as Rosynyar and Poltavka. Russian and Ukrainian forces are contesting several settlements along key axes northwest and west of Turansk. Elements of Russia's 20th Motorized Rifle Division, supported by artillery and drones, are actively engaged in the area. Pokrovsk faces concentrated Russian assaults and is currently a focal point of fighting, with Russian forces intensifying attacks across the front. Ukrainian defenders confront urgent threats within and around the city as Russia adapts new offensive tactics. Chasiv Yar, Donetsk Oblast. Russia recently captured Chasiv Yar, a heavily fortified eastern city. This victory allows Russia to target Ukraine's so-called, quote, fortress belt, a network of defensive strongholds, and opens further offensive opportunities in the region. Zaporizhia region, Russia maintains high-intensity bombardments, over 400 airstrikes on 16 settlements, leading to heavy casualties and destruction, marking continued contestation in this southern front. Let's first review the importance of the Battle of Debaltseve, which was fought between January and February 2015 and marked a major setback for Ukraine, the Donbass region, Its importance stems from several key factors. Quote, strategic location. Debaltseve was a critical transportation hub, particularly for its railway junction connecting the Russian-backed separatist-controlled cities of Donetsk and Luhansk. Control over Debaltseve allowed influence over supply lines and movement in the region, making it a focal point for both Ukrainian forces and Russian separatist forces. 2. Ceasefire violations in Minsk II. The battle occurred during a period of intense fighting despite the Minsk Protocol, September of 2014, which aimed to establish a ceasefire. The escalation at the Debaltseve exposed the fragility of the ceasefire and led to the signing of the Minsk II agreement on February 12, 2015, as international mediators, France, Germany, Ukraine, and Russia sought to halt the violence. However, fighting continued even after the agreement, undermining trust in the peace process. 3. Military and political implications. The battle resulted in a significant defeat for Ukrainian forces, who were encircled and forced to withdraw under heavy pressure from Russian-backed separatists, supported by regular Russian troops. Oops, you're going down too far.
Sorry.
Okay. The loss highlighted Ukraine's military vulnerabilities at the time, including issues with coordination, logistics, and equipment, while boasting the morale and territorial control of separatist forces. 4. Human cost and humanitarian impact. The battle caused significant casualties, with estimates of hundreds killed, both military and civilian, and thousands displaced. The intense shelling and fighting devastated Debaltseve, exacerbating the humanitarian crisis in the Donbass region and drawing international attention to the plight of civilians caught in the conflict. 5. Geopolitical ramifications. The battle underscored Russia's direct involvement in the conflict, as Western governments and organizations like NATO cited evidence of Russian military equipment and personnel in Debaltseve. This intensified sanctions and diplomatic pressure on Russia, further straining its relations with the West and solidifying Ukraine's push for international support. 6. Long-term impact on the conflict. The fall of Debaltseve consolidated separatist control over key areas of the Donbass, setting a precedent for the protracted, low-intensity conflict that followed. It also shaped Ukraine's subsequent military reforms and increased its reliance on Western military aid to counter Russian aggression. We subsequently learned that Minsk II was a sham, devised by the West to permit Ukraine to rebuild its military forces. Angela Merkel made statements about the Minsk II agreement in interviews in 2022, specifically in June and December. In a June 2022 interview with Der Spiegel, she indicated that the Minsk talks helped Ukraine, quote, buy time to strengthen itself against Russia. She elaborated in a December 2022 interview with Die Zet, stating, quote, the 2014 Minsk agreement was an attempt to give Ukraine time. Ukraine used this time to become stronger, as you can see today. The Ukraine of 2014-15 is not the Ukraine of today, end quote. Following Merkel's confession of the real purpose of Minsk II, Vladimir Putin publicly admitted that he had been deceived by the Minsk II agreements in statements made in November and December of 2022. In a conversation cited in the book Vladimir Putin from the Annals of the um, 21st Century. Putin described the Minsk agreements as, quote, nothing but sheer deception, end quote, and said that Western leaders used the process to buy time and prepare Ukraine for war. In December 2022, Putin elaborated that, quote, no one was going to fulfill the Minsk agreements, end quote, admitting, quote, it turns out that they also deceived us, and the point was only to pump Ukraine with weapons and prepare for combat operations. Apparently, we got our bearings late, to be honest, end quote.
Well, he was honest.
Yes. Now we have Donald J. Trump begging for a personal meeting with Vladimir Putin. While some in Russia have expressed fears that Putin is once again being offered the Charlie Brown meme of kicking the football, I think Mr. Putin has learned his lesson and is not going to reverse his stated policy. While many in the West are pushing the narrative that Putin will give up claims to Zaporozhye and Kherson, that is not true. Those two former oblasts have Ukraine are now, according to the Russian constitution, legally part of Russia. Putin does not have the authority to change that fact without legislative action by the Russian Duma. Given this fact, I believe the deal that Putin will offer to Donald J. Trump is a halt to military operations in Sumy and Kharkiv if and only if Ukraine withdraws its military forces from Donetsk. Where are we? Okay.
Mm, I'm sorry.
Okay, where was I? I'm trying to think.
Those two former oblasts of Ukraine are now, according to the Russian Constitution, Putin does not have the authority to change that fact.
Right, okay. And
He's,
then
so I think,
down,
given this fact,
right. Given this fact, I believe the deal that Putin will offer Donald J. Trump is a halt to military operations in Sumy and Kharkiv if and only if Ukraine withdraws its military forces from Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson, that NATO and all military support for Ukraine, and that the United States agrees to negotiate based on the draft treaty Putin presented to Joe Biden in December 2022. If Trump does not take that deal, the war will continue until Russia consolidates all territory east of the Dnieper River.
okay, that paragraph there, right there,
Hmm.
is just extremely important. If Larry Johnson is right, uh, that is the deal that Putin is going to offer to Trump. Okay, it means that these negotiations should be pretty cut, and dried. Okay, the Russians, of course, are getting stronger as we speak in Sumy, okay, in Kharkov, and they're getting stronger in Donetsk and Luhansk also. In Donbass, those fortified cities, the line of five cities, seems like it's just about to fall. Pokrovsk, uh, in particular, seems to be a site of collapse of the Ukrainian forces. It seems clear the Ukrainians don't have the manpower to shore up the line. They're desperately trying to do that now, I understand. I also understand that they are not succeeding. If that line of fortified cities should fall, then my understanding is there's nothing between those cities and the river. So the Russians will have a clear shot, at the river. Okay, and furthermore, the Russians have been assembling tanks for some time in very large quantities so that when the time is right, they can quickly move. And the time may be getting to be right, okay, at this point. Please go on, D.
Okay. I recorded a monologue on Thursday before all the details about the meeting in Alaska had been announced about what to expect from Putin-Trump summit.
Okay, we won't go over the monologue because we have a lot of stuff on what to expect from the summit. Okay, there is a second short blog, okay, that's next on our schedule. Would you like to do that as well?
Sure, why not?
Okay, so let me put that up there. Okay, this is also from Larry Johnson. And it raises the naivete question directly. Here we go.
Is Vladimir Putin naive in pursuing a meeting with Donald J. Trump? 10 August 2025, Larry C. Johnson. Confirmed in general.
Yeah.
I don't pretend to know what Vladimir Putin is thinking, nor do I know his motivation for agreeing to meet Donald Trump in Alaska on Friday, August 15th. I note that the date is significant because it marks the day in 1945 that Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's unconditional surrender, effectively ending the war in the Pacific. The Soviet Union played a decisive role in pressuring Japan to end the World War II by launching a massive invasion of Japanese-held territories in Manchuria and declaring war on Japan on August 8, 1945, 2 days after the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. Joseph Stalin delivered on the promise he had made to President Roosevelt at the Yalta Conference in February 1945. This action shattered Japan's hopes of using Moscow as a mediator to negotiate peace and threatened a total military collapse by opening a new overwhelming front. Soviet advances were swift and devastating, revealing Japan's defenselessness in the north and generating panic among Japanese leaders. Many historians argue that the Soviet attack weighed as heavily, or more so, than the atomic bombs in Japan's decision to surrender. Japanese policymakers had previously considered Soviet neutrality vital for any negotiated surrender. The sudden reversal left continued resistance hopeless and risked occupation by communist forces. I would not be surprised that President Putin will remind Donald J. Trump of this past cooperation, i.e., that the US and Russia have a history of working together to achieve peace. I think President Putin's objective in meeting with Donald J. Trump is to secure a commitment that the US will end its support for Ukraine. Do I think that is a realistic objective? No, but it is a legitimate objective because Putin does not want the war to escalate into global conflagration. I also think that Trump and his deluded team of national security advisors genuinely believe that Russia has suffered massive casualties and is on the brink of economic disaster. As I have pointed out in previous posts, both assumptions are foolishly wrong. I do believe that Putin will try to educate Trump on the true situation on the ground in Ukraine and will reinforce Russia's long-standing position that this is not a territorial war with Ukraine. This is a proxy war with NATO. While I have chided Putin, comparing him to Charlie Brown, I think that the Russian president fully understands the duplicity and the malevolence of the West, especially that of the US. Over the last 25 years, Putin has been repeatedly rebuffed in his attempt to join NATO and ignored in his warnings to the West to put a halt to efforts to incorporate Georgia. He wisely kept Russia out of a direct military confrontation with the West in the wake of the February 2014 Western-backed coup in Ukraine, while continuing to try to secure an agreement with the West that addressed Russia's security concerns. Then there was the January 2022 rejection by the U.S. of Putin's draft treaty for a security deal that would have put an end to the eastward expansion of NATO. Putin was harshly criticized in Russia for his decision to withdraw Russian forces from the Kyiv region at the end of March 2022 as a gesture of Russia's seriousness about concluding a peace agreement with Ukraine, an agreement that would have left Ukraine with the Donbass. Yet Putin did not hesitate to order the mobilization of reserves in September 2022 and the conscription of 120,000 new soldiers. It was at that moment that Putin realized that Russia would have to bring greater military pressure in order to crush Western ambitions.
Hmm.
Okay, we kind of
Yeah,
scrolled.
I lost control again. Let's see. Uh, right, here we go.
Okay, yeah. My main point is this. I think Putin firmly and completely understands the threat from the West, but he also knows that Russia's have ha, military might has expanded dramatically during the course of the special military operation. It is not only the growth in the size of the Russian military that has boosted Putin's confidence, it also is the fact that Russia has surpassed anything the West can field in terms of hypersonic missiles, drones, tanks production, artillery and shell manufacturing, fab bombs, and electronic warfare.
Okay, just to comment, the FAB bombs are very huge as explosives. Like there may be 3 tons. Okay, so please go on.
Putin clearly understands that Trump's urgent request for a face-to-face meeting is a direct result of the crisis on the battlefield that is enveloping both Ukraine and NATO. Russian forces are showing no signs of slowing their advance or pulling their punches in anticipation of the summit scheduled for Friday in Alaska. I cannot rule out that Zelensky, with the full backing of his erstwhile European allies, will try to execute a dramatic military strike on Russia before Friday. If that happens, and significant damage is inflicted on Russia, then the summit will likely be derailed, unless Donald J. Trump strongly condemns Ukrainian action and immediately curtails support for Ukraine. A successful attack without condemnation from Washington will be seen in Russia as just another act of U.S. duplicity and further confirmation that the U.S. has no serious intent on ending the war. At that point, Vladimir Putin will decide that there is no alternative but a military victory imposed by force.
Okay, so 2 comments here on this final part of the piece. By Larry Sanger. Sorry, by Larry Johnson. The first comment is okay that the way things are looking, I wouldn't be surprised if we're seeing a major rout of the Ukrainians in the 2 days left before the scheduled meeting on Friday, because the Crufts situation is really seeming like a collapse, okay, at this point. Okay, we just have to watch over the next 2 days, okay, so what happens. Obviously, if there is a total collapse there, okay, then the Ukrainian position becomes very much weaker in terms of the negotiations, and the orientation of Trump to to end the war by giving a lot. I shouldn't say giving because it's not actually giving, uh, uh, but agreeing uh, to the acquisition by Russia. Okay, many of the territories, okay, in Ukraine will be strengthened. Okay, now I also know, though, here's the second point. Okay, the Russians are expecting a Ukrainian attack. They're expecting them to try to undermine the meeting, uh, with an offensive that is going to hurt Russia. Uh, Not only are the Russians suspecting an attack, they are waiting for an attack, and they are planning to crush it. So I guess we have to look for an attack on the next 2 days, and we have to look for a retaliation by the Russians uh, that they will try to make as devastating as possible. So I thought those points were important to make. Let us check our comments at this point, see if there are any. Uh, so Mr. Wonderful pointed out, oh, by the way, after Mr. Wonderful's arrival, Wayne Santelman also arrived. Wayne says hi to everyone.
Hello, everyone.
And Mr. Wonderful said, I want to point out that 9/11 is confirmed to be an inside job. She solved a controlled demolition, brought down these buildings. Richard Gage confirms. So that is a quote from the redacted program. Okay, I gather. And I haven't had a chance to watch that yet, so I can't really comment on it. Mr. Wonderful said, of course, see the source after the show. Mr. Wonderful greets Steve Wolfbrand. Wayne Santelben says, Trump, Zelensky having a call later today. Be interesting to see how that goes before the summit. And Lana Dell greets everybody. Hi, Lana.
Hi, Lana.
And Lana asks Steve, what's new? Steve says, not much, Lana. Steve says, I doubt that Trump has very much knowledge of history. Certainly correct. He has a strange relationship with books, an inconvenient relationship with books. Wayne Santelban says, the other factor which will be established very quickly in meeting Trump are Putin's red lines. In meeting Trump and Putin, his red lines Gaza, which Mr. Putin is not happy. Evelyn asked, do you mean a devastating attack on Russian soil by the Ukrainians? Yes, I do. Of course, it will be an attempted attack. Whether it's devastating or not will depend on the Russians, who are expecting it and who are very much motivated to crush it. Evelyn asks, before the summit, I mean. Yes, before the summit. Mr. Wonderful says, at Joe Firestone and Parrington Money, yes, I agree. It is very likely Ukraine will carry out an attack during or before Putin enters talks with Trump in Alaska. Yes, so I guess we can expect some fireworks. A lot of people agree. Mr. Wonderful also says, I anticipate whatever attack that's carried out by Ukraine, it will likely be an act of, terrorism. Yeah, I think so too, because I think the Ukrainians are much stronger at that than they are at any conventional attack. So yes, I do agree that's likely to occur. So let us move on. The next video is about, also the naivete question. It's a longer video on Glenn Deason's program, or from that program. This is an interview of Brian Berletic, who is a very, very good commentator on weapons, but also on the overall foreign policy of the West, the overall foreign policy of the United States. He's very compelling as a commentator, and you will see that now. Okay, I've shared this now. And we'll start it off at about 1:56 in.
A ceasefire so that the United States can have European forces, and they also said non-European forces, whoever that will be, move into Ukraine and freeze the conflict. They have no interest at all whatsoever in resolving this. We have to understand that the conflict itself is a U.S. war with Russia simply being fought through Ukraine. It is U.S. commanders at the top of the chain of command of the Ukrainian armed forces. It is the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency overseeing Ukrainian intelligence agencies who are killing journalists, generals, and others in the streets of Moscow, who are coordinating attacks using U.S. and European missiles to hit targets all across Russia. So this isn't something that's suddenly going to change. This is simply another ploy by the United States to draw in and outmaneuver geopolitically an adversary. It still considers an adversary and will not give up in terms of encircling and containing.
Well, I think, this very much reflects Russia's main concern, though, that anything that comes from the US, also Trump, will be a temporary halt, simply because, the Russians are winning. So, which is why the Trump shift to a ceasefire was, I guess, opened up a lot of eyes in Moscow that perhaps this motivation by transforming relations, that this wasn't necessarily the case. So again, they're looking for...
This Italian trick with raw tomato is making prostate surgeries drop across Europe. And in the U.S.,
any efforts by the U.S. to temporarily halt the fighting, allow NATO to regroup, reorganize the Ukrainians, and then continue fighting later at some point in the future. But I assume that if the Russians would accept this deal, it would have to be something that includes no NATO, no de facto NATO, in other words, no trainers and NATO weapon systems in Ukraine, and also no weapons flowing in. And I assume this would have to be the foundation of an agreement. But so far, what we heard from the American media, at least, everything is focused on territory. I'm not sure if this is just narrative control, or if they simply are not really aware what they're going after. But do you think the Russians would go for simply a territorial issue, freezing conflict, without actually addressing the source of the war, that is Ukraine being used as a proxy.
It's hard to tell what the Russians will agree to, what their thinking is. We can only go off of what we see represented publicly. But the Trump administration itself, not saying nothing of the US's recent history of, even just in regards to Russia, trying to reset relations while at the same time preparing to utterly betray any sort of trust Russia places into the United States. The Trump administration itself has already used negotiations earlier this year, to draw in Iran for a decapitation strike the U.S. spent months preparing Israel to carry out, and used negotiations and we were warning about this, that they were going to use the negotiations to lower Iran's guard, to draw them in, and then have Israel carry out this attack that is essentially a U.S. attack carried out through Israel, so the U.S. can absolve itself from both responsibility and retaliation once the conflict began. And then the U.S. itself waded into the conflict almost immediately. And now they're doing the exact same thing to Russia. They're asking Russia to come negotiate with us. And this whole meeting between President Putin and President Trump in the United States should be of great concern to everyone. The United States has a history of killing national leaders. As I just mentioned, they tried to decapitate the Iranian leadership, military and civilian leadership. They also killed civilian scientists. Last year, the U.S. aided Israel in decapitating Hezbollah's leadership. And President Trump himself, just earlier this week, was bragging about how Iranian General Qasem Soleimani was lured to Iraq and killed in a U.S. drone strike he says he authorized in 2020. Why anyone would entertain meeting with the United States when this is their track record is beyond me. I just hope Russia understands all of this, that they're not blinded by the perception of success on the battlefield and some perceived leverage they have over the United States. The U.S. doesn't see things in these terms. They have a single track mind. They have pursued this since the end of the Cold War up until now, without deviation, without interruption, and they will continue to pursue it. And the things that they are willing to do as they face increasing setbacks drives them to increasing desperation and thus danger. So people saying they would never do anything to President Putin, maybe not, but I think now, more likely now than ever before.
Okay, I agree with Brian on that. I don't know how high the likelihood is for a variety of reasons, including the Russian capability to retaliate in very, very harsh terms, which would surely follow any assassination attempt. But you have to consider the role of the deep state here in the United States. They're generally the ones who prepare the decapitation strikes and who most favor them as an instrument of foreign policy. Okay, given the context of the recent situation in Iran and the decapitation strikes, in that country, I frankly think we have reason to fear that it's possible for that kind of strike to happen to Putin in Alaska. As I say, I think the likelihood is low of that happening, but I also think it's appreciable. I don't think it's a silly idea on Brian's part at all.
Yeah, well, there's I guess a track record here. Also, if you look at this isolated case of Ukraine, I mean, all the deals that were made, I always make the point that you mentioned the European security architecture, or since the 90s, we actually had agreements with the Russians for a common European security architecture based on indivisible security and not dividing lines. But they walked back those in 2014. It's worth noting that when the government of Yanukovych was destabilized, the Europeans signed under this deal for a unity government, which they then broke within the next 24 hours. So they broke this agreement. Minsk 1, Minsk 2, Istanbul. So it's hard to believe that they're willing to give up Ukraine as this, very powerful dagger in the side of Russia. Indeed, we saw what happened.
For me, it's hard to understand why the Europeans feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see the logic. There have not been indications that Russia wants to, conquer any part, of Europe. That what they're about is removing threats to their security, which are created by NATO and by the Americans. I don't understand the extent of the animus that leaders in Europe appear to feel towards the Russians and towards Putin, in particular. It makes no sense to me. It must have been one of the things, at the bottom of the silence, of the Europeans when the pipeline was blown up. It was clear the Americans were the cause, of the blowing up of the pipeline. And the Europeans sat there and took it, even though it was such a terrible blow to Germany and its industrial power. And even though the effect of that blow has been a turn down in the economy of Germany since then, which has spilled over into other economies of Europe, which are all very shaky right now. I mean, I think the destruction of the pipeline is a very high price for the Europeans to pay just to continue, this animus towards a Russia that appears only to want to be left alone so it can do business in Central Asia and the Far East. So I don't know what is motivating the Europeans.
I don't either.
I don't think it's the European people themselves. I think it's their leaders.
Yes.
I don't know what has gotten into them. But in country after country, this idea of taking Russia down, has gotten into them. I can't explain it.
Happened in the Ukraine, where the attempt to activate Georgia as another front against Russia. I assume that this is the ideal purpose of Ukraine in the future, to have it something hanging over which they can use against the Russians for the next time tensions increase. So I'm not saying that the Americans suddenly are now struck by very benign intentions. Trump wants to walk back empire. Indeed, the fact that he shifted to demanding unconditional ceasefire, I think there's a good indication that they wanted to do exactly the same thing, freeze it and keep this.
I started Tai Chi at 50. Now I'm 68, and doctors ask.
Ukrainian proxy, which you can use against Russia in the future. But that being said, the Russians, they ignored America or Trump's 50-day and then 10-day ultimatum. Putin didn't even respond to it. And when Trump began with his nuclear bluff, or sending this nuclear subs, we saw that the Russians then, for many reasons, decided to move away from any restraints on intermediate missiles. So they kind of shown that they're not going to fall for pressure, either if it's sanctions or more weapons being shipped to Ukraine. So I assume that Trump wouldn't go away from the unconditional ceasefire out of his good nature, but there must be a panic, though, because what is the option to accepting a very unfavorable deal? I mean, all the important logistics centers are now being encircled. You see the collapse intensifying. Essentially, any bad deal today will be worse tomorrow. I'm just wondering what the mindset might be in Washington, because it doesn't have to be good intention. They can still want to continue fighting Russia, but wouldn't this be the best option for Washington now, to just put an end to this where it is?
No, because their overarching geopolitical objective is to contain Russia and China and everyone in between. And even now, as President Trump is inviting President Putin to go meet him in Alaska, the United States is still consolidating control over Azerbaijan and Armenia. We just saw that in the news, the corridor that was supposedly being leased to the United States of all countries for 99 years. This is literally in the Rand Corporation paper extending Russia from 2019, which lists all of these options to encircle, contain, and eventually collapse the Russian Federation. And so even as peace is being proposed, they're still going down the checklist, checking off all of these options. They're still using these options to place pressure on Russia and to encircle it. People have to understand this isn't a misunderstanding. This isn't Biden's war, as President Trump continuously refers to it as. This is continuity of agenda, and the Trump administration had picked up exactly where the Biden administration left off. And it only is going to end in betrayal and tragedy for Russia if they were to fall for any of this. Now, we remember about 4 months ago, I remember doing a video almost exactly like this. There was the proposed ceasefire. I think it pertained to energy infrastructure target, and Russia agreed to it. But after carrying out an unprecedented strike on Ukrainian energy infrastructure, and they said we will adhere to just that in one month. All of the targets were already destroyed. They agreed to it. This bought them time, and I'm hoping that is what Russia is doing right now. They are buying time. They are dragging this out. You say for the United States, things will never be better than they are now to make a deal. But at the end of the day, they do not want a deal. They want to prevail over Russia and over China. And all they want to do is pause it and restart it later. That does not suit Russia at all. So they have no incentive at all to agree to this. As you say, this would be a dagger in the side of Russia, regardless of the status of the conflict, whether it's frozen or it continues. It is still hanging over Russia's head. It still requires resources invested in Ukraine, in the direction of Ukraine. And this prevents Russia from helping its other allies, Iran, Syria, which has now collapsed, by the way, and China, who the United States is clearly still aiming for, is still, as we speak, carrying out measures to ramp up conflict with both of these nations. The United States just demanded Lebanon disarm Hezbollah, a key ally of Iran in the region. They are eliminating Iran's allies, isolating Iran. They want to remove Iran. And as I repeatedly say, this is about division of labor. That the U.S. wants to remove itself from the Ukraine conflict. They want it to continue through Europe. And so this is my fear, is that the Trump administration is posing as wanting peace with Russia. They will even declare peace and walk away. But then they will have their European proxies take over, and they will do it in a way that makes it look like, well, the Europeans did this unilaterally against the wishes of the United States. There's this division between the US and Europe, and they will use that as a means of continuing the conflict. And again, you mentioned Minsk 1 and Minsk 2. They admit now, in retrospect, that this was all done just to delay, just to buy time, just to reorganize Ukraine, just to continue the conflict longer. So that is exactly what they are doing, and it'll be up to Russia to maneuver through this minefield successfully.
Okay, so the Azerbaijan agreement, with the Armenians, that was brokered by the United States. That agreement is to create a corridor between the two countries that's going to be called the Trump corridor.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
Of some sort. Okay, and that corridor is going to cut off Iran from Russia, create a barrier because the Iranians, and Russians are trying to build a north-south transportation security corridor, and that corridor would go through not Armenia, I think, but Azerbaijan. So it's already been the case that the Russians, and the Iranians have responded to this effort by the United States. Russian troops are still inside of Armenia, and they have been moving to crush the effort by the Armenians to go ahead with this agreement. Now the agreement has not yet been approved by the legislature of either of these countries, and it has to be approved by the legislature. And so the Russians are already pressuring the political system, the Armenian political system, to get rid, of this deal. The Iranians, have also begun to react. My understanding is that they are beginning to mass troops on the border, with Azerbaijan, and are getting ready to react in a military fashion if this deal goes through. So this is very important also, but the main point is that while the United States is beginning to hold peace talks with Russia, another part of the U.S. government, I'm certain, the deep state, is creating this, trying to create this new corridor in order to cut off the transportation, the north-south transportation security corridor that the Russians and the Iranians are trying to create. The corridor would begin, in India, go to Iranian ports, and then by rail, up to Azerbaijan, and from there, would go into Russia. Azerbaijan, of course, has to cooperate in this, but the Azerbaijanis are actually playing games. They're playing games with Turkey, and Israel, because they're involved in the shipping of oil to Israel, which is a very lucrative pursuit for them. So there are geopolitical games that are, being played here on both sides, and that are very important for the future of all countries concerned. But the basic point here is the Americans are stirring up more trouble for the Iranians and the Russians, while Trump is trying to engage in peace talks with the Americans. You can trust that Putin is going to raise the Central Asian conflict issue with Trump at this summit. I mean, Trump's going to hear about it. I mean, I don't even know if Trump knows what's going on, but he's going to hear about it. And I'm sure that a condition for any comprehensive settlement is going to involve the U.S. backing off in Central Asia, not trying to meddle in Central Asia, anymore. That's going to be Russian, Chinese, and Iranian sphere of influence, and that Russia is going to insist on that. That's going to be a big point of disagreement that's going to arise in these talks.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. I remember back in 2015, 16,
Hi, I'm Mark Elias, a lawyer for the Democrats, and I need your help to join me in standing up against.
After Crimea, then there was a lot of American think tanks and different journals who were writing about how would it be possible to engage with Russia in Asia while containing it in Europe? So that is we don't want to go head to head against Russia and Asia because we need the Russians there to diversify, not become too dependent on China, and ideally also help to contain China to some extent. But this possible friendship with the Russians, recognizing that the world is multipolar as a reality, not as a desire or a policy, but this was a very difficult thing to bridge, and this could be a way to do it, I guess, if you continue to can't contain or confront Russia in Europe, but do it through the European proxy. So you're selling weapons to Europeans, and the Europeans are doing this against Russia. Not, the US has nothing to do with it, even though the US will probably still not just supply the weapons, they will still do the assist with the logistics, provide the intelligence, the strike data, and of course have their military planners on the ground. It is interesting that this deal comes, or this meeting comes within a week from what's happening in Azerbaijan, the lease of this Zangsur corridor for 99 years. This is, the only thing I'm wondering, who will it start a conflict with first? I'm assuming actually it will be the Iranians who, they more or less said that irrespective of what Russia does, this is not going to be acceptable to them. So this is, another conflict which is being sold as a peace agreement. But there you are. But wouldn't it, if this is the goal of the Americans, then to avoid direct conflict with the Russians in Europe, but in order to try to work with them in other areas, how serious do you think the efforts to establish or improve bilateral relations are?
U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth in February, this is another one that I repeat very often. He delivered a directive to America's European proxies in the region, and he said, we need to pivot to China. You need to step up and do more in Europe. And so in actuality, when you look at the details of what would be happening, as you mentioned, it will still be U.S. generals at the top of Ukraine's armed forces chain of command. It'll still be the CIA operating through Ukrainian intelligence. It'll still be U.S. weapons being laundered through the Europeans. It's all just for appearance. It would still be a U.S. proxy war. But they want Europe to divert more resources away from the actual interests of the European people into this proxy war rather than the United States itself paying for this. Again, that is the division of labor. That is a term Secretary Hegseth literally used in that directive in February. And his goal is to pivot. So this is part of the strategic sequencing. Pivot to China, deal with China, and then circle back toward Russia. There is no partnership. There is no friendship. There is no future between the current interests that run the collective West and Russia. They want Russia to be dismantled and absorbed by the collective West. There is no future for a sovereign Russia in the minds of the interests running the collective West now. And there won't be until those interests are pushed aside and a new collection of interests replace them, which is something that I don't foresee happening anytime in the near, intermediate, or even distant future. And so
the real question here is whether Trump is ready to change this overall trend, overall division, overall plan of American foreign policy to defeat its rivals in sequence. Starting with Russia, or maybe starting with Iran, then shifting over to China, and then circling back again, to defeat Russia. Yeah, maybe accept a pause in the fighting with Russia right now, a pause that will serve as a basis for rearming, what remains of Ukraine, and to give time for the rearming of Europe. There are many nations in NATO now which have agreed to spend up to 5% of GDP to rearm. Why do they want to rearm? To have a war with Russia before 2030. So interests in the U.S., the deep state, are implementing a long-range plan to vanquish not only Russia, but Iran and China, over a period of time, by enlisting the help of allies and by using the military and political influence of the United States, and especially the capacity of the deep state to overturn political regimes that are not in line with the program of the United States. So Brian is saying this is a long-term sort of program. And so this effort by Trump is probably one to give space for the pause, but the pause is only part of the framework to get a long-term victory over Russia, China, Iran, and also the BRICS nations, as we will see. So Putin, from Brian's point of view, is being a little naive in actually negotiating with the United States. But maybe he's just trying to buy some time for the Ukrainian collapse, in which case he's not actually naive. But if his intention is not that, if his intention is actually to get a peace agreement that is satisfactory from the territorial point of view, then he would not be recognizing the overall intentions of the United States. And if we look at this from the point of view of Trump, unless Trump really understands what is happening and how he fits into the long-term foreign policy of the United States that has been in place and has been getting executed over a number of administrations now, if Trump doesn't recognize that this is going on and doesn't have an explicit intention to end it in favor of creating normal, peaceful relations with Russia and some of the other nations, then Trump is entering this negotiation with bad intentions. And the likelihood is the outcome of these talks will not be agreement among the parties, because in the end, it's unlikely that Putin is not going to accept anything that does not address the underlying cause of the Ukraine war. And what is that underlying cause? That underlying cause is the long-term commitment of U.S. Foreign policy to create a situation where the U.S. remains the hegemon of the world, the sole hegemon. That is, at this point, still the intention of the foreign policy of the United States. Just to think back in time, we used to believe ourselves, the Americans did, that Soviet Russia was an ideological state, and what it had in mind was the domination of the whole world by communism as an ideological commitment to the state. And when you were negotiating with them, you could never really trust them because they were not, negotiating in good faith. They were always negotiating to gain an advantage in relation to pursuing their long-term program, which was for communism to dominate the whole world. And we recognized, or we thought we recognized, that kind of ideological commitment, from the Soviets, and we opposed that. And that was a lot of the reason for the Cold War. Well, what some of us are seeing now is that there's an ideological commitment on the part of the Americans to be the hegemons of the world for all time to come. And so, insofar as the effort of the United States to remain the hegemon is still there, you can never engage in talks with the United States unless you have a plan to ensure that those talks do not contribute to the long-term objectives of the United States to continue domination of the world. So that's really the issue. That's what Brian is calling attention to here.
So this is not going to change the objective of the United States. It will not change the relationship between the U.S. and Russia. And if Russia were to fall into this trap and work with the United States against China, for example, all they would be doing is setting the stage for their ultimate betrayal down the road. They would buy themselves maybe some time, but without China helping them in the future, if that was removed from the board, if we could use that analogy, they would be hopelessly outmatched in the future when the U.S. finally circled back around them, which they have openly said is their objective. So, and here's the thing. I don't understand why world leaders seem to constantly fall for this. They seem like they want to go back to the status quo so badly they're willing to believe almost anything. And I remember thinking with a lot of confusion, why is Iran negotiating with the United States? They are not the arbiters of global nuclear programs. This is their plan. They have written it down on a piece of paper 16 years ago, and they have been implementing it step by step ever since. Why are they doing this? And do they realize that this is what is going to happen? And are they prepared for it? And then when the U.S. carried out its decapitation strike through Israel, using U.S. weapons, using U.S. intelligence, they were killing Iranian military and scientific leaders in their homes, in civilian residential buildings. These people should, at that time, during the negotiations, they should have anticipated the attack. For some reason, they did not. And all of these people were killed in their beds with their families. And so this is what worries me about negotiations between Russia and the United States. The fact that we have to stop and think, is Russia actually going to fall for this or not? The fact that it's not a certainty that no, they're not going to. That is what bothers me.
Okay, so I think I'm going to end this here. I originally planned to, go a little farther, but I think the main point, has come out here. That the U.S. may be setting a trap for the Russians. So we have a number of other YouTubes to go through, but I'm going to go back now and look at where we are. My promotion on Twitter has created a lot of viewers for this broadcast. We are now up to 6,446 viewers. But let me get into your comments here. I was wondering about that too, Evelina says. Will Gaza be something addressed at the summit? I think it will be mentioned. I don't think that Putin is going to limit the summit to Ukraine alone. Because what Putin is interested in is a security framework that will stop the wars. And Putin has expressed great concern over the Gaza war, and lately has been making even threats that the Russians might want to intervene. So, yeah, I think Gaza is going to be addressed at the summit, especially if it turns out that Zelensky is kept out of the summit, which I think the Russians will insist upon. Mr. Wonderful says, I share Berletic's concerns and skepticism. Yes, obviously I do too. That's why I played it. Evelina, Wayne Santelban says to Evelina, he says, I feel it will. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and spokesperson Kremlin Dmitry Peskov will be part of the summit, have already stated their relationships with the West are at an all-time low. An attack is coming again against Iran, Israel, the USA. It's the timeline, not sure when this year will be. Well, there were estimates that this was going to go on perhaps in September. But I tend to think it's a little early for the Israelis to attack again. They took a beating. And since the ceasefire, there are some occasional eruptions from the Iranians. And some of the one-off attacks have been devastating. Also, the Houthis continue attacks on Israel. Just yesterday, there were back-to-back attacks. I think on Tel Aviv again. The Israelis are not able to fend those off. Their defense systems, are in just a shambles. But they're ineffective. I don't think the Israelis have been able to reconstitute them, at all. I don't know if the United States has been able to supply any replacements for the THAAD systems. I don't think it looks very good for Israel right now. I heard an estimate today. They might have to wait until December to start up again, but I might have misheard that. They might still have been saying September. Netanyahu wants to do it, but what he needs is a commitment from Trump that Trump is really going to help and is not going to hang back this time or do something symbolic. And so I'm sure the Iranians are waiting and watching this time. Some people believe that since the Iranians have now tested their systems very well, and since they now have upgraded their air defense, with Russian technology, and they now have 40 J-10Cs from China. There is a feeling among some people, Larry Wilkerson in particular, that this time the Iranian attack on Israel is going to be a killer attack intended to destroy Israel. And in Larry's opinion, which is very strong from the military point of view, he says he thinks the Iranians have the capability to destroy Israel, and at this time they will be aiming to do it. Wayne Southland, thank you, Mr. Firestone. You have a great analysis situation. Wayne says, I have a question. If al-Shara Jalani, Syria president eliminated, doesn't that leave a huge vacuum leadership in the country? I don't think I can answer that question because he was not a Syrian leader in the first place. In other words, he was a leader, of jihadists, and they seized a country that was falling apart. But as the disorder stays in Syria for some time, there's a possibility that Syrians will self-organize around others who won't be tolerating the mass killings of Christians and Alawites and other minorities that have been going on in Syria. Syria is a very fluid situation, and it's possible a new leader that we don't see right now is going to emerge, and that people are going to self-organize around the new leader in order to overcome the disorders that Turkey and the Israelis and the Kurds have been benefiting from in Syria. So I guess my answer to that is we can't tell whether there'll be a huge vacuum in leadership in the country or whether a new leader that's much more representative of Syrian interests is not going to emerge to take over the country. Evelina says, and we know Trump, for all his talk of controlling a deep state, is not at all in control. I know he's not in control. Okay, but I don't know if he has the mental capacity to do this. Strictly a matter of mental capacity. But he has the authority of the presidency. He can move to fire the authorities in a deep state overnight. He can have them all removed. He can put the Secret Service on them and get them out of their offices. Clean them out. He has the authority to do that. He has the authority to do what the Pope is now doing with the Catholic Church, if you forgive, the analogy. So, if he really takes it in his head, that he wants to do that, and if he has a few Confederates to help him, the presidency has the power to clean out the deep state. So, I agree, we know he is not at all in control, at this point. I'm sure he knows that he is not in control. He may be completely befuddled by that. I don't know. But we're going to have to see what happens. Evelyn says, I can't see how an assassination attempt on Putin's life in Alaska can happen without Trump's, necessary approval. Well, it was possible for rogue groups inside of the deep state to manage the assassination of John F. Kennedy in 1963. In other words, there are elements in the deep state that are not under control, not under the control of the president, and not under control of the authorities in the deep state. And we don't know, what they can do. We still don't know who was behind the assassination attempts on Trump when he was running for president. Evelina says, eliminated by whom? Wayne says, Evelina, within or by Israel, his army have perpetrated a crime in southern Syria. Suuda at a hospital. A Finnish man, follow Vac Media, posted a short video on it. It was not Druze or Bedouin. Mr. Wonderful says, there's also a great interview from Glenn Deason. His video is titled Alex Craner, NATO and the EU became outdated in the multipolar world. Yes, they did. Mr. Wonderful said, of course, watch after the show. Of course, watch after the show. Wayne Sanfelben, isn't he being used by Israel to eliminate the Druze as well as Alawites in southern Syria? Wayne says, Evelina Pont, that's true. Also, I can't disagree with you. The Zionist state under Bibi seems to get away with Bloomberg all the time. The fake news media keeps saying there's a democracy there, no better nor worse than apartheid South Africa. They are worse than South Africa, I think. They seem worse. It is definitely possible, Joe, however, that brings the Samson option into play. Well, I think that's going to depend on whether the attacks by Iran are successful in decapitating Netanyahu. They may well be successful in that. I mean, the Iranian attacks next time are going to be devastating. I don't think the Israelis, if they start off, they're not going to start off with the Samson option. By the way, we don't know whether when the Israelis attack, that when that time comes, that the Iranians will not be a nuclear power. We've covered some videos in the past that talk about their capability to become a nuclear power in a matter of weeks. And I think now the intention to become a nuclear power in a matter of weeks may be there. It is relatively trivial for them to mount some nuclear bombs onto the warheads of the hypersonic missiles. That is technically quite possible, and we might see that in short order. I don't think the Iranians will hesitate to take out Tel Aviv and Haifa. And I don't think they'll need a nuclear bomb to take out Netanyahu if they know where he is. And there are many people who think that the intelligence agencies of the Iranians have been greatly upgraded since the war. Some are even saying that their intelligence agencies are now better and more effective than Mossad. If that's true, they should not have any problem in managing a decapitation strike against Netanyahu himself. So I agree it brings the Samson option into play, but the Iranians might have an answer for the Samson option. So let us go on to the next few videos. We have a lot of videos tonight. Okay, they are not so long. The next one is from the Duran folks. And I'm going to share that right now. Play it. Let me find out when I'm starting it off. Yeah, pretty much starts from 0. So, okay, let me do that. Am I sharing it? Yes, I am. So, okay, here it is.
The attack on BRICS, which is what we are seeing from the Trump tariffs and the Trump White House. This is shaping up to be an assault on BRICS. At least that's my opinion of things. Trump is saying that he's placing all of these tariffs on India and Brazil. We're now at 50% tariffs for India, 50% tariffs for Brazil. Though there's a lot of exceptions and cutouts to those tariffs, which you'll get into. But still, it is a way to divide BRICS and to sow chaos inside of BRICS. You say to India that you're going to place tariffs on India because of Russia. You tell China to stop trading with Russia and stop buying or to stop sending dual-use goods to Russia because they're fueling the war machine. You want to sow division and discord within BRICS, and I think that's what we see going on. And now we have BRICS uniting. Actually, instead of breaking BRICS apart, we see a type of BRICS consolidation and unification. And Lula seems to be leading the way with this, which is kind of the last person I would have thought to have called for a BRICS meeting and to call on BRICS to unite and to face the United States together. India is also now making moves, not only with Russia but with China as well, and this is having the reverse effect.
Attention, please. This elderly lady in front of you is my 70-year-old mom. I make her exercise.
Than what perhaps the Trump White House was expecting.
You're absolutely correct, and I think this is the general explanation for all of the various diplomatic moves that we're seeing. Now, what has happened over the last year, I think since the summit in Kazan, the BRICS summit in Kazan, is that the penny has finally dropped in the United States. The BRICS is a long-term threat to American economic hegemony. A lot of people after the Kazan summit meeting said, nothing substantive was agreed. There was no setting up of a reserve currency, BRICS reserve currency, or anything of that sort. But of course, a lot of other things were agreed, important things. We discussed this at the time: payment systems, trade systems, banks, and they're all gradually coming together. And Trump has clearly been briefed on this, and he's taking it extremely seriously. And we see an attempt to divide BRICS and to destroy BRICS and to conquer BRICS. And so we have tariffs, 50% tariffs against Brazil, explained through all sorts of specious reasons. Prosecutions of Bolsonaro. I don't mean that Trump doesn't care about that. He definitely does. But Bolsonaro, legal steps that Brazil is taking against American tech companies, a non-existent Brazilian trade surplus against the United States. So we have 50% headline figure, 50% tariffs against Brazil. We now have 50% tariffs. I believe it's actually, probably speaking, 55% tariffs against China. Now, people don't understand this because the headline number is 35% tariffs against China. But in fact, tariffs against China have been creeping up for some time now. And if we go back a couple of years, tariffs against China have increased to around, again, a headline level, about 55% against China. Remember, China is the major target. There's also tariffs and pressure on South Africa. And there's also threats against Russia. Now, this is very complicated because India is being blamed for buying oil from Russia. The United States.
So, this issue of BRICS is also going to be brought up by Putin, at this summit. It's going to go up beyond the Ukraine situation. Russia's going to strongly object against the sanctions and the tariffs. Putin's going to say, as a condition of peace with us, if you really want to have peace with us, you got to get rid of these things. I don't know what Trump is going to say to that, but if he doesn't respond in a positive way to that, he can hardly expect that Putin is going to react very positively to things that he wants to do in the Ukrainian situation, especially since Putin is holding the military whip hand in that particular situation. Trump can't have peace with Russia if in various ways he's making war on Russia. He can't be free to levy very high tariffs on India because it wants to buy Russian oil. That is not going to fly.
Trump, however, seems to be trying to win over Russia because they seem to think that Russia, which is already under a lot of pressure, might be the country that might be drawn out of the BRICS eventually. So you tell the Indians, blame the Russians that we put tariffs on you. We then invite, or we then seem to be talking to the Russians. We're having summit meetings with them. We're playing this complicated game of trying to break up the BRICS, and we're using tariffs in order to do that. And you're absolutely correct. The BRICS are responding. Now, the first thing to say about these tariffs is that they are not all that they seem. So 50% tariffs against Brazil, but apparently there are huge numbers of carve-outs in the tariffs against Brazil. So all sorts of things like business jets. Embraer, Brazilian company, makes business jets and other kinds of jets. Apparently they're not subject to tariffs. All sorts of other products that Brazil produces, also not subject to tariffs. I understand that in the case of India, India's total trade with the United States is around $130 billion a year, imports, exports. Apparently, only about 20 billion of that is going to be subject to the 50% tariffs because there are so many carve-outs on other things, on pharmaceuticals, on electronic goods, on all kinds of other things, that the reality is the tariff against India is well below the headline rate. China, even more so. Again, lots of carve-outs on the tariffs against China. Electronic goods basically not subject to them. So already we can see that the American position is not quite as strong as it looks to be on the surface. The Americans also clearly very nervous about making real steps against Russian energy, Russian oil and energy exports, despite talk that they want to do that, because they're very nervous of pushing up energy costs as well. So the Americans are launching an all-out attack on the BRICS, an economic attack on the BRICS, but already it's looking as if
this is a pair of needle nose pliers used by all electricians in Germany. It can replace multiple tools like molten.
The BRICS economies are stronger than the Americans perhaps anticipated, so that the Americans are having to pull some of their punches. And the BRICS, who clearly understand that there is an attempt to divide them, are on the contrary combining. And we can see this. So Lula is talking about calling an emergency meeting of the BRICS. Now, here, I get to say it again, you get the news very often first on the Duran, because we did a program some days ago in which we actually said that there would probably be at some point soon an emergency meeting of the BRICS. And now we see that Lula, who is, by the way, I mean, this year, it's Brazil that is chairing BRICS. So Lula is the chair of BRICS. He's going to call India. He's going to call China to set up an emergency meeting of the BRICS. So that is clearly now on the cards. It is on the way. Modi is going to visit China, and apparently that trip might take place as soon as next week. Just before we started making this program, reports coming through that the Indian government has now sorted out, has now agreed the dates of Vladimir Putin's visit to India. So all of these various countries are now in discussions and contacts with each other. India is meeting China and Russia. Modi is going to China. Putin is coming to India. Brazil, Lula is talking to India and China, and before long, Russia too. The Prime Minister of Malaysia, which is also, I believe now, either a BRICS state or a BRICS aspirant state, is in Moscow. Expect over the next couple of weeks an extraordinary summit meeting of the BRICS to take place, and the BRICS will then agree further steps to take integration between them a whole step further, because, to repeat again, exactly as we've been saying, in program after program, the major catalyst of BRICS integration has been American economic pressure.
What can BRICS do together to fight off this attack from the Trump White House? Do they need to do anything? Or is it just a matter of staying unified? Just staying unified and staying on course. You don't need to panic, because as you mentioned, there are a lot of carve-outs in these tariffs, which Trump is not going to talk about. He's going to say 50% tariffs, peace through strength. You see, I'm pressuring India, I'm pressuring Russia. Everything is good, but he's not going to get into the details of all the carve-outs with these tariffs. For example, what you mentioned about India, that India does have carve-outs, and it makes these tariffs a lot weaker than what they sound, than what they appear. But does BRICS need to do anything, or do they just need to stay united?
You know, I think you actually are asking an excellent question, because I'm going to make a guess that is going to be the primary purpose of this extraordinary meeting. It is to reaffirm BRICS unity and the commitment of all of the various states to the BRICS. They will this time want a meeting in which all the leaders are there. One of the things that Trump the Americans and others have been talking about, was that Xi Jinping and Putin didn't attend the BRICS meeting in Rio. Now, we've discussed at the time why they probably didn't want to attend that meeting. One of which was that they didn't want to, Putin didn't want to put himself at risk by traveling all that enormous distance when there's a warrant out for his arrest from the International Criminal Court, which the Europeans might try and enforce against his plane if it was flying to Rio. So Xi Jinping also didn't want to meet Modi at that time because relations between China and India were difficult. But Modi is now going to meet Xi Jinping. If they decide to hold the meeting, let us say in India, which is a real possibility, then all of them can meet and they can all show that they're united together with each other, that there are no cracks within the BRICS, and that they're all talking together as one. The problem with doing more practical things is that they are doing those things already. To do them properly takes time. To work out payment systems, to do all of the technology things that needs to be done, to unite various, payment systems that already exist in different countries to sort out all the technological glitches. That is not something that really you should hurry, because if you do, you will get a defective system. And as somebody who knows an awful lot more about tech than I do, I suspect you will say that it's much better to set it up properly from the beginning than have to repair it all the time after you set it up and got it going. So I think that they're probably not going to rush to do those things that they already agreed that they would do in Kazan and which they took further during that meeting in Rio.
Why is Trump all of a sudden so obsessed with BRICS? What do you think did it for him? Wouldn't it have been better if Trump tried to play along with BRICS? I'm not saying become a part of BRICS, but worked with BRICS. What was the thing that pushed Trump over the edge with BRICS? Because 4 months ago, BRICS to Trump was Brazil, Russia, India, China, and Spain. That was BRICS to Trump 4 months ago. What did it?
And as you absolutely correctly pointed out in one of our recent programs, if you followed the election last year, the subject of BRICS never came up at all. He never said that he was going to go off and attack BRICS last year during the election. I mean, this has all come together over the last couple of weeks. Well, I'm going to make a guess that he's been briefed. He's received a briefing from someone, perhaps the CIA, perhaps people in Congress, who telling him that BRICS is a clear and present danger to the United States, that his entire economic policy will be thrown into chaos if BRICS succeeds, and that this has somehow alarmed him and is making him turn on BRICS in the way that he's currently doing. I can't come up with any other explanation. As I said, I presume he's received a report or a briefing from somebody about the threat from BRICS and is taking it very seriously.
I wonder if someone told him or his advisors believe that you can kill two birds with one stone. You can end the conflict in Ukraine as well as destroy BRICS and preserve the U.S.'s unipolar moment. Yes. So attack India, attack China, attack Russia, attack Brazil, break up BRICS. By breaking up BRICS, you also destroy Russia's funding for their war machine and dual-use goods and Russian oil and all of that stuff. So you accomplish so much by escalating your tariff policy towards BRICS to the point where you solve all of your problems.
I think you've actually answered the question.
All of your foreign policy problems are solved.
I think you've also answered the question. I would add something else. I wonder whether the other thing that finally propelled Trump over onto the side of this was that whoever briefed him also told him this is the way to isolate China, because China is at the center of the BRICS.
Okay, so I have to say at this point that I don't think this strategy of Trump's and these tactics to divide and destroy BRICS are going to work. You already see BRICS talking about coming together to strengthen the commitment to BRICS. But individually, the BRICS nations are telling Trump and the United States to go fly a kite. I mean, Trump raises these tariffs, and then he has to back off all kinds of carve-outs because the economy of the United States is so intertwined with the economy of India, the economy of China, not the economy of Russia, of course, because we've sanctioned the hell out of him for so many years, and not the economy of Iran either, because the same thing. But, with respect to Brazil, we have a trade surplus with them, but they can easily replace what they were getting from the United States from certain other countries. It's easy. They can find other markets for their produce, for their meat, for their coffee, for their technological products, for their raw materials. They're turning to Indonesia. They're turning to China. It's all happening very quickly. And of course, the BRICS nations want to accommodate each other as much as they can, because that's about sticking together against the United States and defending the multipolar world, which they all want very, very much. So this effort by the United States to tell India, don't trade with Russia, has had the opposite effect, at least initially. It's driving the Indians to talk to other BRICS members, and not just Russia. But Modi has scheduled a trip to China. And they're going to talk about, burying the hatchet between those two countries completely. They're going to talk about what they can do together. They, of course, are the world's most populous nations right now. 1.5 billion people in India, 1.4 billion people in China. Between the two of them, nearly 3 billion of the people on the earth, roughly 3/8 of the population of the earth, in those two nations. I think these tariff moves by the United States are just stupid, and their impact is negative upon us. It is not positive upon us. We don't have any industrial policy in place to replace the products from these other countries that we are now blocking from the United States. And since we don't have any industrial policy, we're only encouraging the development of inflation, in our country.
And this is their trading system. So break it up, isolate, which is, of course, the neocon dream. I mean, it was what they've been trying to do all of these years. Isolate China, and that this may very well have evolved out of the trade war between China and the United States that we saw in the spring, in April and May. That if you break up BRICS, You've isolated China. China doesn't have alternative trade partners. And then you can hammer the Chinese, and you can force the Russians to agree to the freeze of the conflict, and you reestablish the hegemony of the dollar, and everything is well and good. And the United States is the unipolar superpower again.
Yeah. So what happens when and if and when Trump decides to impose these 100% tariffs on BRICS? Does that mean Brazil is getting 150% tariff? Does that mean India is getting 150%? Does that mean China is getting 135%? I believe it's at 35% now.
Yeah.
Is that what we're talking about? And what effect will this have on oil, the price of oil?
I serve my country, and now I carry legally everywhere I go. Here's how. National Concealed.
On the U.S. economy, on the global economic situation?
Every analyst that I have read and heard, every serious analyst agrees that doing this thing would be absolutely catastrophic for the US and Western economies. I mean, they are at the center of a world trade system from which they'd be net beneficiaries. I mean,
So I'm going to stop it right there. I agree. It's going to be catastrophic for us, okay, and our close allies. It's going to drive the BRICS nations closer to each other. And remember, they're not just the 4 nations or the 5 nations that we've been mentioning at this point. There are now, 11 or 12 countries that are members of the BRICS. They're getting new members all the time, and they have another 10 partner countries now. And they're looking at the expansion of the member and partner countries soon to 40 nations. And the 40 nations will have most of the population of the earth. Indonesia has just become a part of BRICS. Something like 212 million people living there. Egypt, part of BRICS, 110 million people. Iran, part of BRICS, 93 million people. Nigeria has been talking to BRICS, something like 220 million people in that country, the largest in Africa. South Africa, is one of the foundational BRICS members, actually the 5th one to join. They're over 100 million people. Ethiopia is over 100 million people. I mean, you are soon will have the heavy majority of the world's population inside of BRICS, and they're developing a trading system to trade with each other. Now, they can trade with others too. It's not an exclusive club, but they'll have an incentive to trade with nations that don't want to use the dollar to trade. And the United States increasingly will be isolated over a period of time. So I think these efforts to defy and destroy BRICS are going to fail. I also think that as short-term efforts, they will totally fail to have an influence on the war inside, of Ukraine. That war will now be settled at the outside in months, and the attempts to destroy BRICS won't have any effect on that war whatsoever. Not whatsoever. But the efforts by BRICS to integrate and to develop a new financial system in which the members can easily trade with one another, those things are going to go on, and there isn't anything the United States can do about it. So, let us go to our comments here. When Santel Ben says, decapitation Netanyahu, the world would celebrate. Evelina says, Dr. Joe, thanks for the thread of optimism in response to Wayne's questions. A new leader in Syria that answers to the Syrian people's real interest, i.e. unity and peace, is certainly possible given the black hole Jolani in Israel and to a certain extent Turkey have created in the country. Yes, Evelina, right on. Right on. You are right on. Not created, but have made of the country. You are right on. Right on, yes. Evelina says, the entity has many heads, though, decapitating one, it would grow another, okay, and yet another after that. But in the short term, it won't be able to grow another. If there's an immediate decapitation, okay, of Netanyahu, it will certainly be weeks before some other crazy willing to push the Samson option would show up. And it's just as likely that if you have the decapitation of Netanyahu, that someone who is more reasonable realizes the threat to Israel and wants to go strongly towards a two-state solution, that someone like that would take over in Israel. Maybe I'm being too optimistic about that, but I do think that's a possibility because the Israelis, after the next attack, will see that their very existence is threatened. Some of them are going to be practical enough to begin to think, we better settle this, or we won't have an Israel at all. That's going to become apparent to some of them. Steve Wolfbrand said, I'm back. Mr. Wonderful says, I want to add a point about BRICS. Many countries around the world, and one of those countries that may be joining BRICS eventually is Venezuela. I don't even think it's eventually. I think, Venezuela is going to join in the next year and a half. Evelina says, I agree, Dr. Joe, breaking up BRICS is virtually impossible. Short of a nuclear war, that is. Still, BRICS countries possess such powerful arms deterrence that, they never include nukes. But, obviously the BRICS countries, if you look at Russia and China together, and the two of them together have greater capability to deliver nuclear weapons than the United States has at this point in time. I should say at this point. To say at this point in time, okay, is redundant. But I think the Russians have more warheads, than the United States. I think China possesses a fairly large amount of warheads. We don't know what the number of warheads is, 600 or 700. But they may even have a greater missile capability than Russia to deliver those warheads. Certainly very close to Russia's capability and maybe greater than our own. Wayne says, in an ideal world, be nice to say to Israel, you're no longer welcome in the Middle East, pack your bags, or move some other country you all came from. However, it's not that simple, is it? No, okay, it's not that simple. As long as the Israelis still have the Samson option, it makes more sense to get two-state solution there. But if you get that kind of solution, you have to structure things in such a way that the Israeli right wing is, sent packing, and that Israel is once again left with a majority of Europeans that are running it, because those are the ones who are willing to accept two states, who care more about the continuing existence of Israel as opposed to the building of a greater Israel. So that distinction is very important. I've always felt it is important for the Iranians to drive the Israeli settlers back home. Evelina says more and more people are abandoning the two-state solution, Dr. Joe. I'm very well aware of that, but the two-state solution is still the official position of the UN. It is preferred by the Arab nations, inside of the Middle East, because they want to take advantage of the technological sophistication of the Israelis. They want to do deals, with the Israelis, in various ways. The problem with Israel now is that it's been taken over by a right wing that is extreme, religiously intolerant, and that wants to create a greater Israel from the Nile to the Euphrates. And it wants to include just about the whole of Syria inside of Israel, except perhaps for the Kurdish areas. That cannot be allowed to happen. It cannot be allowed to happen. So how do you stop that? You drive the people who want that to happen out of Israel. And you do that by destroying their settlements. The Iranians have the capability to do that. Those people can go back where they came from. There can then be a majority of Arabs, and European Jews still left, in Israel. The Israeli political system can change, so it is no longer dominated by the right-wing Israelis. And then you might be able to attain a constructive two-state solution. Yes, the two-state solution is the official position of the UN, and that's because it's supported by many of the states, in that particular region. Wayne says we need to keep striving for a two-state solution. It's the veto against by USA seems to be the problem, in the UN. When you say we, of course, we have to exclude, the United States, because we have not been striving for a two-state solution. We have been blocking, a two-state solution. But we may change our minds if it becomes obvious to us that the very existence of Israel is threatened, that the only way to keep Israel around is to have a solution that is a two-state solution. That if the right keeps pushing, they are endangering the very existence of Israel as a viable state and community in that region. And I think they are doing that, obviously. So, let us get on to our next video. We still have 2 more videos to go. One is fairly short. This particular video, yes, Australia wants to see a 2-state solution also. That's true. This is a video from the judge and Alastair Crooke. Okay, Alastair Crooke is the most brilliant of the analysts of the Middle East. He is one of the people who knows the most about Middle Eastern states. God bless you, honey.
Thank you.
So we picked this up at 1:57 in. I don't know if I'll play the whole thing yet because I'm running short of time. But let's take it from 1:50.
Alastair Crooke, welcome here. Alastair, you wrote a great piece a few days ago about Russia seeking to comprehend fully the various constraints on President Trump, just as relevant today after the announcement of their meeting in Alaska at the end of this week as it was before we knew when and where and even if they were going to meet. But I need to ask you this at the outset. Who has more to gain and who has more to lose by this meeting between President Trump and President Putin in Alaska on Friday?
Well, that depends entirely on what happens. But I think in the sense of who has much to lose is that I think that in terms of Ukraine, it's very unlikely that we will see much progress. I think what we will end up with the continuation of the war as Russia presses on with its military operation. With Trump, it's quite clear what he really wants is a headline, a good headline. He wants to be the center of attention again. He wants to dominate and to show that he's dominating the world scene, that he's, the great leader and that everyone comes. And so I think Witkoff was sent off to try and sort of fix that so that there could be, a great splashy meeting with Putin, and it would be, him and Putin together, and as others have suggested, even sort of bringing in Zelensky at the end. But the reality is straightforward. The reality is nothing has changed. There's no change in the Russian position. There's no sense in which the Russians have given any hint of a concession to offer Trump, except the ones we all know. And what happened, I think, was it may be much more complicated because it seems, and we don't know the details because nothing was reported about that conversation, but that Witkoff may have misled certainly the Europeans and Trump because he misunderstood what was being said. That at one point, Putin said, well, if we take a ceasefire could happen if we take the Donbas, that is Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast. And as for Zaporizhia and Kherson, well, we can have a sectorial ceasefire in that we will stay there in those 2 areas, but we will stop attacking the Ukrainian forces for the period of a ceasefire. It seems that Witkoff may have understood that Russia was proposing a withdrawal. And that's why we have all this talk about swaps taking place and swapping land and so on. It wasn't proposed that at all. This was just, as he said, a sectoral ceasefire in those 2 provinces. Donetsk, the Ukrainians have to, for Donbas, they just have to withdraw from it. But he was not proposing a Russian withdrawal.
Right.
Person. And so I think that's caused, and what's happened is the Europeans have gone nuts. I think they're meeting about now on Zoom with Kallas, the European leader, and all coming, how to stop this and how to get if you like, how to get Zelensky into this discussion and Europe. I think they've given up on trying to get Europe into it, but they want Zelensky in it. And of course, the Russians have said, no way. In fact, I think the Russians have suggested if you do that, who knows, we could have Medvedev or someone in. But the point is, this has never been set up properly, because it's remained as the archetype of General Kellogg, which is that until there's more pressure, until there's more pain felt by Putin, there won't be agreement. And clearly, since he hasn't moved on, we need more. So he's advocating to the Europeans, and the Europeans are taking.
Okay, so General Kellogg is thoroughly committed to this long-term policy of the United States maintaining itself as the hegemon of the world, or at least, or maybe retaking the position, okay, of hegemon of the world. And he doesn't see real peace settlements in Ukraine or anywhere else taking place. He wants freezes that allow the rearming of the Ukrainians so they can live to fight another day. That is what he is about. What Putin is about is addressing the underlying causes of the war. And we have to recognize right now that Putin will not stop fighting, because now, even more than a few weeks ago, he is winning the war. The Ukrainians are on the point of collapse. He has absolutely no incentive to abandon the field of battle right now, unless the United States and the West is willing to give up this foreign policy of the United States. Unless it's willing to give it up, okay, unless Trump is willing to fire the people he needs to fire to implement a new foreign policy, unless Putin sees those moves and other moves that show the United States is relenting on its policy of opposition to Russia, of unfriendliness to Russia, then I think Putin stays on the battlefield and he completes the process, and we're lucky if he doesn't move to the Polish border. That is what I think.
We need more sanctions, tariffs on Russia and on Russia's friends, secondary tariffs on Russia's allies. And the American ambassador to NATO has said, yes, more secondary sanctions. They're coming. It's war on BRICS, essentially. So with all these pressures, what is Trump going to get out of this? And I would suggest that Putin chose very carefully to have this meeting in Alaska. And I think that Witkoff met for some hours before meeting with Trump with Kirill Dmitriev, the head of the Russian Sovereign Fund. He's a man who's Wall Street trained. I mean, he's a product of an American bank, and he's very bright, and he negotiates with Witkoff. I'm sure that what could come out of it, because as I say, they understand Trump needs a headline. He needs something good news, a showstopper, something that will excite everyone. So what about the Arctic? Here we are, in Alaska. What about the Arctic? Look, huge raw earth, huge deposits of minerals, oil, gas. Join with us in a joint project in the Arctic, and you'll make billions and billions from it. And so maybe, I don't know, I don't have evidence from this, but that choice, and it does go back there were talks between American oil companies. This was pre-Biden, between American oil companies and Russia for joint production. I mean, it's a very rich area, and there is a lot of resources there. And would that tempt Trump to say, I've got a great deal out of this. We're going to make millions, billions of dollars from this deal. Let's forget, Ukraine we'll talk about later at another time.
Yeah.
So maybe.
I think you're right on the mark in thinking the way you believe Trump thinks. But from your experience as an ambassador and as a diplomat, when heads of state meet over something as dramatic as war, isn't there usually an agreement hammered out ahead of time, and the meeting is just the formality for them to take credit for the agreement that their underlings actually worked out? If that is the case, this is an abnormal meeting. As far as we know, nothing has been agreed to other than the time, date, and place of the meeting.
I think this really goes back, and the blame for the fact that this meeting is held without any preparation by Sherpas or others to get this in order. And you're absolutely right. I mean, usually it's the heads of state. They don't come to negotiate with another. They come to sign the agreement that has emerged. And this won't be the case. And I think, where it's all gone wrong is with General Kellogg, because he has just insisted, no, there must be a ceasefire first, a straightforward ceasefire. Political discussions, no, you don't need to prepare them. We don't need to do anything. They will take care of themselves based on the sort of Korean model. And so nothing has happened. And the line is simply, well, now we need, if you like, tariffs on all those dealing with Russia, more tariffs. And I think to get out of this is one of the reasons Trump wanted so much to have this meeting, because it's quite clear to me, but you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me McConnell and others in the Senate are trying to regain control of the Republican Party away from Trump. And one of their tools for doing this is for tariffs and sanctions, because they know perfectly well that if they put tariffs and if they make Trump agree to a system of tariffs, whether it's on India or China or other BRICS countries, it will prevent ever a chance of normalizing relations with these countries, because we know America never lifts sanctions. I mean, they stay forever. It's impossible. There's never been a case of sanctions being imposed and then really lifting. So I think he's desperate to get out of being penned in by some of the hardliners in the Republican Party who can't stand the MAGA forces there at all, and want to get back to a sort of uniparty approach, which sees Russia as something that must be reduced to dependency on America, that it has to be subjected to enough pressure that it becomes a dependent country like other countries. And hence all of the firing up. And this is what Putin will be seeing all around. The pressure on Azerbaijan, that new proposal to put NATO forces right on Iran's border. All of what is happening, the heating up of the ISIS movements, the attack on Lebanon, the attack across the region, shows that Trump has no agency on the Middle East. He is shown.
Okay, I just have to say, the idea of putting a few NATO troops, a few American troops, right on Iran's border in the northern part of Iran is an idiot idea. The reason why, it's an idiot idea, is because the Iranians can put more than 1 million troops on that border. And they'll be back by huge numbers of drones, okay, and missiles. They'll be able to reduce the Azerbaijanis, okay, and the Armenians and the NATO forces that are there to rubble in very short order without even much help from the Russians. And they will get some help from there, especially air defense help. We cannot win such a war there. It is not possible. If we fight a war with the Iranians, or NATO fights a war with the Iranians, then the United States will end by getting kicked out of the Middle East. That is what is going to happen.
That for whatever reason he's trapped, cannot take action there. Perhaps he doesn't know the motive for the trapment, but he understands that he's entrapped, or he doesn't know quite what the details are. And that is connecting into the American aspect of that as well.
As we speak, you mentioned this earlier, European heads of state and foreign ministers are meeting in a Zoom meeting. Also, as we speak, General Kellogg is in Kyiv. Now, what is he telling? What can he possibly be telling President Zelensky? For all we know, General Kellogg's on the Zoom meeting as well. But we know he's in Kyiv or on his way to Kyiv. What could he promise President Zelensky?
I don't understand Trump with respect to Keith Kellogg. That man doesn't have a new idea to offer, about anything. Why does Trump even want to be in the same room as him? It is just beyond me.
Well, I don't know what he's going to say in Kiev. Obviously, I can't read his mind. But what I hear is, and what we've been told reportedly, that Macron and Starmer agreed in a conversation between the two of them that what Zelensky must do is to do some provocative operation, a false flag operation or a provocative attack into Russia, into the depth of Russia, or something.
That's the attack we've been expecting.
Something else, we don't know, sufficient to create an absolute pressure on Putin to respond, and thus to destroy the meeting altogether, to stop the meeting taking place. The Europeans are terrified of the meeting taking place, and they want to stop it. And this was a discussion, I believe, Russians have probably picked up on it, and suggesting that there isn't going to be an attempt to create some incident, some security catastrophe that creates the impossibility of following up on this meeting. And they're trying to put Zelensky into Alaska, whether invited or uninvited, to sit there on the borders and to sort of toss verbal hand grenades into it.
Don't you think that if Zelensky shows up to Alaska, even if he's invited by the Americans, the Russian delegation will go home?
Yeah, they won't talk to him. They'll say this was not in the agreement. I don't think Trump will do that. I don't think he'll do that. I think he understands that they won't do this with Zelensky. This is part of the disruption tactics the Europeans are using.
How close is Russia to achieving its military objectives in Ukraine?
I think very close to an inflection point, which is that, after the Maidan revolution, there was set up in a very sort of urbanized area, this series of about 5 cities, which were turned into fortresses, into a new defensive, a new Maginot line, if you like, of defense. And it's breaking up, and it's cracking, and it is being destroyed. And when it is broken, that is a major change psychologically, socially in Ukraine, but of course militarily, because there's nothing then. Russia will be on the Dnieper River. So there's a great deal of anxiety, and I think this is causing the European furor, is they sense that they could be at the point of defeat, that Ukraine, they do finally see that the situation is becoming past critical mass. It is getting critical mass, and it could change dramatically any moment. And this is what's causing this huge, I mean, they've been in discussions ever since it was announced. All the time they are talking about how to stop Trump, how to contain this, how to ensure that European interests, so-called, will be guaranteed in this process. European interests, of course, means continuing the war.
Right.
That's all.
Right.
So if Trump is really looking for a peace prize, why is he allowing Keith Kellogg to run him around and undermine him? I mean, what's up with that? Doesn't he understand what Kellogg is doing?
The Republicans in the Senate have two proposals making their way through the legislative process, one for about 50 billion, one for about 100 billion more aid to Ukraine. Now, the way these proposals are structured, it's subject to the discretion of the president. So even if he signed this into law, he doesn't have to spend it. But Colonel McGregor, Colonel Wilkerson, Scott Ritter have all told us that the United States military supplies of offensive and defensive weaponry are dangerously, dangerously low. And at some point, we will have to stop providing the Israelis, about which more in a minute, and the Ukrainians with the level of military supplies with which we've been supplying them. I don't know if these senators understand that.
I don't either, but I do think what you've just said is absolutely correct. There's no inventory, and Europe doesn't have the inventory either. So the question is, can money alone sustain Ukraine? I mean, how do you have an army, and how do you fight, if you like, if you haven't got weapons? I mean, the money is actually damaging. I mean, I found that in Afghanistan all those years ago when I was there. I used to persuade the CIA, try to persuade them, and I said, you know, if you put too much money into Afghanistan, all you create is divisions, and people are jostling each other, wanting a bigger share, and no one actually fights because they're more concerned with grabbing their share of the loot that's coming in. You have to contain the amount of money you give to the weaponry and the ability you have to take this forward. And they're not doing that. So it's only money that's left, whether it's European money, American money, just money going in, and that money that ends up in, you know, back in American banks and European banks. It doesn't actually change the situation on the ground. And they are on the cusp of a big defeat, which will be a blow to Europe because it will destroy, you know, the whole European conceit that they are somehow a politically significant power. And the whole idea that Europe is something to be contended with, that it is a power, and it has to reduce itself to nothing more than a trade association and a regulatory body. And this is causing great despair in Europe.
If you haven't exercised in years, you have to start small with my beginner-friendly Tai Chi class.
Is MAGA turning against Israel?
Yes, I believe not only MAGA. I think it is.
Okay, I'm going to stop it here. The central points, okay, are made. It's a situation where there are many complex pressures on Trump. where he doesn't seem to have control of the situation. He seems to have people working at cross purposes to him. It's a very hard situation to understand. It suggests, though, that these meetings that we're looking at, that perhaps there will be only one meeting in Alaska, that things may very well fall apart at the end of that meeting, because in scheduling the conference in the first place, there was too much of a gap in minds for the two of them to actually meet. Let us turn once again to your comments, see if there are any new ones. Oh, Friar Steve is here. Hello, Friar Steve. To offer his perspective. Lana Dell says that I am muted. No, I don't believe that I am muted. Steve says, Lana, I hear fine. Yeah, I think I've been okay all along. I don't think I ever was muted because, I never muted myself. Friar Steve says, no, Doc. Iran did nothing when Israel killed their leaders, nor when this tyrannical, lying U.S. administration bombed their nuclear sites based on false information. They didn't destroy a single Israeli settlement, so no, Doc, none of that will come to pass. Well, I understand that's true, Friar Steve, but I think the next attack is going to be different. Friar Steve says, gotta go. Another Fox host can't bear this. I wish you had better news sources, Doc.
Well, the one thing is the fact they were going after military targets. That was what Iran hit, was military targets. And the reason why they didn't go further, as we know, it had to do with the rule that they have.
Yes, had to do with the rule they have. But whether they will observe that rule going forward, with respect only to military targets, they may understand that what they have to do is change the political system inside of Israel.
Right. And, the military, they're all for going all out. It's been the Ayatollah that has this strict rule.
Yes, the Ayatollah has the strict rule, but maybe if the political situation is explained to the Ayatollah, he will understand that if he really wants to move the system to one where the wars will end, that what he has to do is to drive the settlers out.
Yeah, yes, I agree. And
Really, at
this
war
all,
with the settlers. Yeah. And they should be a military target.
Mm-hmm.
They're not simply civilians. They are an armed group that has captured the political system inside of Israel. And they need to be driven out.
Oh, definitely.
Friar Steve says, that's true. All Taco 47 wants is headline. Yeah, that is true.
His ego. It's all about Trump's ego.
Yes, Solana says, can't hear you. You have muted. You need to unmute. No, I am not muted. I am fine. Friar Steve says, Russian imperialism, Doc, Russian imperialism. I don't know why you ignore a foundation of geopolitics by Alexander Dugin. This is right out of the manual. Well, it might be right out of the manual for our Steve, but the point is we are not looking at geopolitics by Russia that assumes that they'll be the hegemon of the world. That's not what they're attempting to do. what they're attempting to do is to safeguard and prosper the people of Russia and the culture of Russia. That is, okay, their motivation. I don't consider it to be imperialism in that sense. They want the territories back that belonged to Russia in the past, in which Russians are now living. Steve says, Lana, I hear fine. Lana keeps saying you are muted, Joe. Fry Steve says, what's next? You want to give Putin the Arctic as well? It's not a question of giving Putin the Arctic. I mean, land-wise, the Russians dominate the Arctic. Now, there's the Russians and the Canadians. I mean, they dominate the Arctic. Yeah, outlined exactly what's going to happen. If not for NATO, Putin would already be trying to take Finland. That's nonsense. He's not going to take Finland. He doesn't care about Finland. That is nonsense. If only Ukraine should have the right to the natural resources, that should not be up to Putin to decide. I don't know why you're such a Putin apologist. He's an oligarch, KGB-trained authoritarian. He's a war criminal, just like Netanyahu. Come on, Friar Steve. Who is Zelensky? Who has set up a dictatorship inside of Ukraine? Who has dominated all the press inside of Ukraine? Who has outlawed most of the political parties, except for the nationalist ones inside of Ukraine? Whose state is dominated by an oligarchy? If you're talking about oligarchy, that situation is far worse in Ukraine than it is in Russia. You're talking about the right to their natural resources. Those natural resources exist in the parts of Ukraine that are populated by the Russians. They belong to Ukraine only as an accident of history. An accident of history. And the Ukrainians would still have those resources if they had treated the Russian population decently. You don't know what you're talking about, Friar Steve. We've had forces in Iraq since 2002. Iraq and Iran share a border. I don't know how you keep getting this all twisted around. Yeah, we've had forces in Iraq since 2002. Now they're very small forces and very impotent forces, and forces very subject to attack by Iranian missiles. Farsi says, Doc, isn't Turkey in NATO? Doesn't Turkey share a border with Iran? No, Doc. So explain why we bombed their nuclear sites and nothing happened. Nothing you're saying is coming to pass, dog. Still waiting to see Iran destroy a single Israeli airfield. It's damaged all the Israeli airfields very substantially. That's what happened last time. I told you what happened, Doc, and I was right and you were wrong. No,
You
I was
were wrong. Yeah.
It'd just be nice for you to admit that you're wrong. I completely agree, Friar Steve. Admit you were wrong.
Exactly. I don't know what he listens to.
Fine. It would be easier for Putin to take and hold Afghanistan than for Russia to take all of Ukraine and hold it. Well, I don't think Russia wants to take all of Ukraine. I think what they want to do is take 4 more of the oblasts and then stop and leave Ukraine with the rest. And by the way, the population of Ukraine is now down to 18 million. If there's a Russian victory, I don't think many people will be coming back to Ukraine. Friar Steve says, Trump was impeached for attempting to withhold aid from Ukraine the first time. That's not why he was impeached. That's not why he was impeached. Nana says, I can hear you now. Fry Steve says, no, MAGA will follow Taco 47 until the last cup of poison Kool-Aid is consumed. Evelina says D is muted. If D is muted, it's because she muted herself.
Exactly.
I did not do anything to mute D. Fry Steve says MTG still voted for every bill of Trump's so far. I have a bad feeling about Alaska, just a feeling. Yeah, I know, there's reason to have bad feelings. Even says, oh, hi, D, thought you were muted, laugh out loud. Fry Steve says, still here, Doc, plenty of military targets in Israel. Yeah. And Fry Steve says, here you good, Doc. Fry Steve says, Doc, to Putin a zero-sum game. He has to genocide the culture of Ukraine for his own. Unsure what. I don't think it's okay, but I don't think he's going to genocide the culture of Ukraine. He's just going to take over the Russian parts. Doc, I recommend you read the Ukrainian Constitution. Why do you recommend I read, the Ukrainian Constitution? Again, Doc, you're screaming Russian imperialism right out of the Putin talking points manual. Well, Fry Steve, there's something about the Putin talking points which you fail to take into account. And that is that a good many of the Putin talking points are straight up true. And that a good many of the talking points of the Ukrainians are straight out lies. I mean, what about Bucha, Friar Steve? Manufactured by the Ukrainians. Atrocities manufactured by the Ukrainians. The Russian had nothing to do with that. Mr. Wonderful, I will say this about Iraq. The first and second U.S. invasions were based on lies. As for Putin, he is the greatest leader in the world. Russians' SMO has to do with R2P, and Russia is wonderful. Well, Mr. Wonderful, I think Russia has been doing pretty well since the takeover by Putin. He's done amazing things for Russia. Mr. Wonderful says, I believe whoever commenting with false statements about Putin, Trump are trolls, and if they're commenting in the YouTube chat, I must have them blocked. Nah, we don't block Friar Steve. He's been coming here for a long time. He says ridiculous things. We just tell him, they're ridiculous. And we move on. He's not troubling us. He's free to say what he thinks here. I mean, we believe in free speech here.
Yes.
So that's that. Okay. So we do have a video left. It's very good video. It's in the last but not least stuff. So I'm going to share the screen for it. It's from Jeff Sachs. And it's fairly short.
It came as a surprise to me because in public, the United States has not taken
from the Hindustan Times
any measures that would actually lead to an end of the war in Ukraine. I put it on the U.S. side because I believe that this is a war fundamentally provoked by the United States over a 30-year period, actually. The United States made a coup in Ukraine in 2014, which brought in this pro-NATO regime after overthrowing a president that wanted neutrality for Ukraine, which is the right policy for Ukraine. If President Trump says finally the truth, which is that NATO will not enlarge eastward, that the United States will stop its relentless attempt for regime change in Russia or to surround Russia, and that there will be, therefore, a neutral and secure Ukraine, then there can be peace. I don't know what he believes in any event personally, but he's surrounded by the U.S. military-industrial complex, which absolutely doesn't believe it. The truth is, it's also his war from the first term. It's Obama's war. It goes back to Clinton. The truth is, this is a U.S. deep state war. This is a CIA, Pentagon, military-industrial complex war.
Introducing our cutting-edge Smart Zoom reading glasses, co-developed by NASA engineers. No eye exam needed. These glasses automatically
Right. So let's just get started. And, as I was talking to you earlier, and I mentioned that, there are a bunch of things that we like to talk about. But to begin with, why don't we start with, Trump and Putin's meeting, which is set to take place in a couple of days from now. And they have met in the past. Last time they met was in 2018 in Helsinki, when Trump endorsed Putin's claims that there was no interference in Russian elections. And then before that in 2017. This time around, the world, however, is looking a very different place. What do you think, apart from Russia and Ukraine war, is going to be on the agenda?
I have to say the meeting came as a surprise to me because in public, the United States has not taken any measures that would actually lead to an end of the war in Ukraine. I put it on the U.S. side because I believe that this is a war fundamentally provoked by the United States over a 30-year period, actually. It's a war of NATO expansion. That is an effort that began in the 1990s, contrary to the promise that the United States had given to the Soviet Union and then to Russia that NATO would not move 1 inch eastward. But when the Soviet Union ended in 1991, the United States reneged on its promise and began NATO enlargement. Actually, that dates back to 1994 when President Bill Clinton made that terrible decision. Since then, NATO has expanded eastward with the intention, explicit intention, of surrounding Russia, and for many in the American political elite, of defeating Russia or dividing Russia, or a term that's sometimes used in Washington, decolonizing Russia. But it all added up to the same thing, which is that after the Cold War, the U.S. policy has been to defeat Russia, not to live peacefully with Russia. Now, the reason that the meeting surprised me when it was announced a couple of days ago is that it's clear what is happening. Russia is saying, if you want an end to this war, we have to get to the root causes of this war. That is essentially NATO enlargement, but many other things alongside that. The United States made a coup in Ukraine in 2014, which brought in this pro-NATO regime after overthrowing a president that wanted neutrality for Ukraine, which is the right policy for Ukraine. Then the United States dissed a treaty that could have prevented the full-scale escalation. That was the Minsk II agreement, endorsed by the UN Security Council, that called for autonomy in eastern Ukraine for the ethnic Russian population of that region. The United States told the Ukrainians, don't do it. Then in early 2022, after the Russian invasion that began on February 24th, 2022, there was a peace agreement almost completed between Russia and Ukraine based on Ukraine's neutrality. And the United States swooped in and told Zelensky, don't sign that. We'll fight on, we'll defeat Russia. So I say all of this as a prelude to saying, what is this meeting about? If President Trump says finally the truth, which is that NATO will not enlarge eastward, that the United States will stop its relentless attempt for regime change in Russia or to surround Russia, and that there will be, therefore, a neutral and secure Ukraine, then there can be peace. But President Trump has not had the guts to say that. I don't know what he believes in any event personally, but he's surrounded by the U.S. military-industrial complex, which absolutely doesn't believe it. So I'm interested, of course, what will this meeting bring? But the idea that Trump has asserted on behalf of the military-industrial complex that there should just be a ceasefire without getting to the root causes of this conflict is a non-starter from the Russian point of view. Because from Russia's point of view, that just means that the West will restart the war on its convenient date at any time, rather than getting to the fundamental reasons for this war in the first place. In this regard, I believe the Russians are right. If this war is to end, it should end by addressing the fundamental reasons for this conflict. The United States was the strong side of this over the last 30 years, and it basically said to Russia, we can do what we want, where we want, when we want, and we will do so. And that's why this war continues. If Trump will say something different, there could be an end to the war.
Meat should be stored in the refrigerator, right? Wrong. Okay, maybe in freezers then, right? Wrong again.
Right. And how confident are you that Trump will be able to do what Obama and Biden did not? Because you talked about the role of the military-industrial complex and, of course, the U.S. deep state. Would he be able to, play by a different playbook, different from Obama's, Biden's, and other presidents before them? And especially because, he sold his voters on peace presidency. And Russia-Ukraine war, of course, is the biggest war that the West has its eyes set on. Do you think Trump, if not for anything else, not for the sake of the millions of Ukrainians who are dead, not for the sake of dead Russians, but perhaps for the sake of the peace prize that he's eyeing, he'd perhaps be able to, walk away from what has been the U.S. foreign policy so far on this matter?
He could, of course. It's his job. I often say, I've said for decades, that the main job of the president of the United States is to put the foot on the brake of the war machine of the United States. That's his job. It's not an easy job. He's not very good at this job because he does not communicate political ideas. He does not speak to the American people. He does not build a base. His idea is that everything is backroom trades, backroom transactions, threats, bluster, bluffs. On that basis, he can't face down the military-industrial complex. It surrounds him. The only way a president can face down the military-industrial complex is true leadership. I don't think Trump has it in him, but I hope I'm wrong. I stand to be corrected. But for that, Trump would have to explain to the American people, by the way, who don't want war, to explain, here's how we get out of this. Here's how we got into it, and here's how we get out of it. He says, this is Biden's war. Okay, that's politics. The truth is, it's also his war from the first term. It's Obama's war. Obama oversaw the coup in 2014 that brought in this current Ukrainian regime. It goes back to Clinton. The truth is, this is a U.S. deep state war. This is a CIA, Pentagon, military-industrial complex war. It has an agenda. The agenda was spelled out, by the way, very clearly and explicitly by Zbigniew Brzezinski in 1997, who explained everything of what the U.S. elite thought. What Brzezinski said was, we will make Russia a second or third-rate power by surrounding it in the Black Sea region so that Russia can't project its power. And Brzezinski concluded in 1997, Russia will have no alternative but to agree or accede to the European NATO enlargement. Well, Brzezinski was wrong. But the point is that Trump would have to explain why we're changing direction. So far, he's not shown the intelligence, the timing, the public side, the understanding of this. So I'm a little doubtful, but I'm hoping I'm wrong.
And so that's it. And that kind of summarizes, I think, a lot of what we've been through tonight. And I almost entirely agree with Jeff Sachs about that and how he put it. And I think he put it in the proper historical context, a very proper historical context. And by the way, I think it provided a great answer to the comments Friar Steve was making. So let us look. So Mr. Wonderful had a lot of things to say. Proof of U.S. CIA 2014 coup of Ukraine. See the gray zone interview of former Ukrainian government official Andriy Pelizhenko on YouTube, titled "Biden's Corruption Led to Ukraine's Destruction." Former Kiev diplomat Friar Steve says Ukraine has the right to join the EU. I don't know that the Russians would stop them from joining the EU. The issue is not whether they join the EU or not, it's whether they're going to join NATO. But if they want to join the EU and give up their right to have a sovereign currency, that wouldn't bother me in particular. But I think they'd be very foolish to do it. Mr. Wonderful says, proof of Nazis in Ukraine. See Journalistically Speaking with Rick Sanchez video entitled, quote, "Say Nazi in U.S. get canceled, say it in Ukraine get funded." Ex-Ukrainian intelligence officer. Proof. U.S. CIA caused the Maidan coup and contracted Georgian mercs to do it. See the Gray Zone article titled U.S. Lawmakers Welcome Notorious Georgian Warlord Now Boasting of War Crimes in Ukraine. Mr. Wonderful, from 2014-2022 in the DPR alone, Ukraine's Azov neo-Nazi led military targeted and murdered 9,417 civilians, 240 children, with 14,616 civilians who injured, including 921 children. That is not including the LPR. That's in the DPR alone. Okay, in other words, in the Donetsk People's Republic alone. And that doesn't include the Luhansk People's Republic. Source, official data, the DPR representative office in the JCCC. Friar Steve, Trumpers don't care when Taco 47 bombs Iran. So they'll accept any Trump war as justified. Stop kidding yourself. I mean, I'm not kidding myself. I know they don't care if Trump should bomb Iran. But they may care when Iran wipes off the face of the earth all of the U.S. bases in the Middle East with its missiles. You need to stop kidding yourself about the Iranian missiles and what they will do. They're going to wipe the floor with the U.S. bases, in the Middle East, and they're going to wipe the floor with the Israelis. And Mr. Wonderful says, R2P is guided by strict criteria, seriousness of the harm done to the population, a just cause for intervention by military as a last resort to coerce peace. R2P is guided by strict criteria. Okay, that's a repeat of the last one. These are the rules according to the UN Charter, word for word, in order to exercise R2P. R2P is in accordance with international law. Since you all have forgotten, let me remind you of the Budapest Memorandum. That's why it matters, because that we honor our treaties or we no longer exist, as a reliable nation. We do no longer exist as a reliable nation. We junked the JCPOA, walked away from it. We got out of the INF. We walked away from the INF. As a result, the Russians have the Oreshnik right now. We have walked away from all of the arms control treaties. Either we honor our treaties or we no longer exist as a reliable nation. Guess what, Friar Steve? We no longer exist as a reliable nation. Don't you have enough sense to look in the mirror? See what's going on? Lana says, I think Jeffrey Sachs is pretty spot on. Lana, if Jeffrey Sachs is pretty spot on, so am I. Mr. Wonderful, seriousness of harm, Azov terrorism, the just cause to intervene, prevent genocide of ethnic Russians, intervention by military as a last resort, Russia entering SMO, after peace negotiations ignored, equals R2P. Doc, that's how this whole thing started. The Russians stopped them from joining. That's what led to the 2014 protest. No, the Russians didn't stop them from joining. The government of Ukraine stopped them from joining because they wanted to be neutral. And 2014 was not simply a protest, it was a coup against a duly elected government, Friar Steve, and a coup implemented with the help of the Nazis in Ukraine, who provided the armed force in back of the coup. It's never been about NATO. It's only been about joining the EU. Bullshit makes the flowers grow, Friar Steve. You are flowers. I was referring to the speaker, Doc, not you. Friar Steve. Doc, if Iran attacked a military base, Trump would try to unite the country behind him. It would only make it worse. He could unite the country behind him. It wouldn't matter, Friar Steve, because we don't have the military capability to beat the Iranians. And if we start a nuclear war, that's going to be the end of all of us. I mean, don't you see? We didn't even have the military capability to stop the Houthis. How are we going to stop the Iranians? Friar Steve says, I'm not going to yell anymore. I'm tired of yelling. I look forward to the day that one of these Iranian missile attacks produces the damage that you say. Some damage, of course, complete damage hasn't. Friar Steve, the missile attacks from Ukraine in the last wave created a mess in Israel, which has not been cleaned up to this day. Are you blind? Have you seen the photos? Do you understand what has happened to Israel? Their economy is in a total shambles. And they don't have the capability to attack Iran by themselves. They need us to come in. Off the subject, Doc, but what do you think about the Epstein files? I'll tell you the truth, Friar Steve, I don't pay a lot of the attention to the Epstein files. I understand the Epstein files tell a story about how a lot of elected officials were compromised by the Israelis and by the big money that controls our politics. I'm all about understanding that, but I don't pay attention to a lot of the details, the Epstein files. I expect a lot of corrupt politicians are in the Epstein files. That was what the Israelis wanted. They wanted to be able to blackmail the politicians. Doc, the people voted on a referendum to join the EU. The president, who was run by Putin, stopped it. The president was a duly elected president. He wanted to stop it because he wanted Ukraine to stay neutral. The people might have voted on a referendum, but they also voted for the president. And he had a right to try to stop it if he thought it was bad policy for Ukraine. And then he fled to Russia. He fled to Russia because the government was taken over by the Nazis, and he knew he was going to be killed. Doc, what about the Wagner Group? They're Nazis. I think you already know that. They weren't Nazis. They were criminals. Mr. One is correct, and what Friar Steve, quote unquote, Friar Steve, you misspelled his name, is ignoring the sources of directly involved individuals who were present and helped orchestrate the 2014 coup in Ukraine. The interview of Andrei Telizhenko. Proof of USA CIO 2014 coup of Ukraine. See the Gray Zone interview of former Ukrainian official Andrei Telizhenko on YouTube and so on. Freisner, Paul Manafort helped him cheat. That's how he won. Keep that in mind. Doc, what do you think about Trump's destroying troops in our cities? Of course, I think that's terrible. Oh, well, Mr. Wonderful says, oh, I'm not seeing this username. No, you didn't block him. Okay, you didn't block him. Friar Steve is coming in on Facebook. His comments are appearing on Facebook. I am using StreamYard. I have a stream that includes comments from Facebook and comments from YouTube as well. You can't see Friar Steve's comments because he's coming in on Facebook. Friar Steve says, tell him to send me any information he has. Well, he may not be on Facebook. Oh, so Mr. Wonderful says, oh, Facebook lagged about. Right. Okay, so Friar Steve, what you have to do to see his comments is go over to the YouTube version of it, and you can see his comments and all the information he has. Andrew, true, it's not Andrew, it's Andre. Okay, it's Andrei Telizhenko. Okay, we're up to 7,016 people who are viewing this particular stream, and we are down to our last piece, which is very appropriate because it's about expectations. It's a short piece. It's again from Larry Johnson, one of our favorites. And it's appropriately titled, Expectations Soaring for Friday. Would you like to read it, Dee?
Okay. Let me enlarge it over here.
Okay.
Expectations soaring for Friday's Putin-Trump summit. It's written to today, the 12th of August, 2025. Larry C. Johnson. I suppose because it is August, with most pundits in all of Europe on vacation, that the thirst for a story is making the upcoming summit between Putin and Trump the current center of the universe. My previous two posts on this meeting have belabored all of the key points and dynamics that will likely affect the outcome of the meeting. I described it on the podcast with Danny Haifong and Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson as the expectations surrounding, an arranged marriage. A groom is told he's going to marry the most beautiful woman in the world, but when he gets the first glimpse at his new bride, it is a Jabba the Hutt wearing a wedding gown. A goodbye romance. One important point that I neglected to address in my previous post on this issue is the fact that Putin and Trump have met at least 3 times previously, and those meetings were friendly and relaxed. I've spoken to a couple of people who have had private meetings with Trump, and according to them, Trump is a completely different person in a private setting. He is terribly insecure and he wants desperately to be liked. Accordingly, he does not engage in the bullying and insults that are part of his public persona. This may be one reason that Vladimir Putin wants to talk to Donald Trump face to face. Putin has the advantage in this meeting. The Russian military's offensive against Ukraine is accelerating, and Ukraine is unable to slow it down. Russia's economy is under control, with inflation projected to fall to 12% by year's end. BRICS is now a very viable project, with India and Brazil especially energized to boost its financial mechanisms in the wake of Trump's ill-advised tariff attacks on both countries, and Putin continues to enjoy enormous public support in Russia. Trump needs a win. Though you would not think so if you only listened to his self-congratulatory public comments. E.g., quote, I've stopped 6 wars, unquote. Not true, but he is obsessed with that meme. Normally a meeting like this would require some serious advance work by Russian and US Sherpas. A diplomatic Sherpa is a high-ranking diplomat or senior government official who acts as the personal representative of a country's leader in preparing for major international summit meetings, such as the G7, G20 Sherpas, quote, do the heavy lifting, unquote, which includes overseeing strategic planning, agenda setting, and detailed negotiations before the actual meeting of the head of state. They often draft summit communiques, coordinate positions among nations, and resolve conflicts. Marco Rubio did drop a hint a week ago that he had held at least one discussion with Russian diplomats. He did not specify who he talked to, so I cannot rule out that there has been some Sherpa activity going on behind the scenes. We will find out on Friday. I participated in 3 podcasts today. The first with Nima, followed by my regular Monday chat with Judge Napolitano, and roundtable with Danny Haifong and Colonel Wilkelson.
Right. So the point is that expectations are sky high for this meeting, but the proper preparation has not been done for the meeting based on the various videos and articles we went through before. We have a situation where to produce anything that's really substantive, this meeting and any follow-up meetings have to induce a change in U.S. Foreign policy. Unless we see such a change, I don't think these meetings are going to produce anything substantive with respect to the Ukraine war. And I don't think these meetings are going to produce anything substantive with respect to a broader change, okay, in the foreign policy of the U.S. In which case, we will be going along with a continuing struggle of the multipolar world against the United States, with various countries trying to avoid a nuclear explosion, trying to avoid having things get out of control, and having various crises that all have the potential to escalate into the nuclear war that will represent the end of human civilization and probably human life on Earth, okay, as well. So there we have it for tonight. It's a somber assessment. Okay, there remains a hope, however forlorn, that these meetings, I should say that there will be more than one meeting, and that these meetings will produce some change. Putin will offer incentives to Trump, financial incentives, okay, and business incentives. That may change the situation and produce some hope. I certainly hope so. But I guess that's the final word for tonight from me. Okay. Dee, would you like to add anything?
What I'd like to add is for people to please hit the like button, subscribe, and share. And also follow Doc on X.
Yes. Follow Doc on X.
Exactly. And he's still trying to get more subscribers on YouTube. So if people could just head over to YouTube and
Any more
subscribe.
Please share, like, and subscribe. And Mr. Wonderful says, empowering democracy, another great show. Thank you. Lana says, good night, everyone. And Lana says, Steve W., Trump deployed military to our cities is infuriating.
Oh, I agree.
Also unconstitutional.
Exactly.
Both unconstitutional, it's illegal, and it is infuriating. And the courts had better stop it before it goes any farther. But we'll have to see if the courts have the guts to stop it. Anyway, it is time to say goodnight. We could spend another couple of hours now talking about, the mess in the United States. Oh, Friar Steve is back on YouTube. He says Trump follows Putin.
Oh, for heaven's sakes, Friar Steve.
I wish he did follow Putin. Okay, if he followed Putin, we wouldn't be about to have a nuclear war.
Hey, yeah, and we'd all have health care over here, right?
Right. In fact, if he followed Putin, maybe Putin would have been led into to NATO long ago. No, of course, that's not true. Anyway, let us say good night.
Good night, everyone. Good night, Bonnie.
Good night.
Okay, I may be too tired to create, any what might have been. Just look at what he is doing in our cities. I am looking at what he's doing in our cities. I hate what he's doing in our cities. I can't stand Trump.
I know.
I'm not for Trump. Get that out of your thick skull. Anyway, time to say goodnight.
Yes, good night, everyone.
So thank you, Dee.
Thank you. A great show.
Thank you. I will see you on Saturday.
Yes, Saturday, yes. And good night, Evelina. Good night, everyone.
Yes.
Let me see to get out of here. Okay.
Yes. And I am going to end the stream. Mr. Wonderful says Z. Z? End the stream.